somebody else.
I have enthusiastic members of this committee that have gotten here on time. I think this might be a record, and so I'm going to take advantage of and seize the moment.
See how you look
I'm going to
this way?
seize the moment. Good morning. This hearing is called to order. We are reconvening the Special Committee on Criminal Justice Reform. I recognize the presence of a quorum of this committee. Ms. Williams, will you please read those in attendance into the record?
Starting from the left, we have Wilfredo Rojas, Richard McSorley, Tariq L. Shabazz, Councilman Curtis Jones Jr., Kevin Bethel, Julie Wertheimer, Claire Shubik-Richards, and Reverend Aidan Morena.
We will also recognize the presence of the author of the resolution before us today, Councilman Green, who has joined us, and we appreciate his dialogue and discussion. The Special Committee on Criminal Justice Reform was established on December 10th, 2015 by a unanimous vote of the Philadelphia City Council. Since our establishment, the committee has held 12 public hearings, half of which were dedicated to public discussion concerning bail, pretrial of incarcerated individuals. From those hearings, the committee was able to issue 2 reports, one of which was solely dedicated to the recommendation of alternatives to pretrial incarceration. In addition, the public hearings and report of our work was included in the consistent planning that was done by members of the MacArthur Foundation in partnership with CJAB, who has been way out on this issue a very long time, and we have joined them and others in the national and local discussion on criminal justice reform. We do this because of the continuum of justice reform is not a straight line. It's not. In fact, when we started this work, the MacArthur Foundation had already given us a generous grant, but we've come together and we've exchanged ideas, and some of those benefits before we've ever implemented are really finding their way into public policy. When you think about it, we've achieved an 18% reduction of incarcerated individuals on state road, and that includes not just us up here, but those of you out there who have made a commitment to testifying and being a part of that discussion. In addition, within our budget in the city of Philadelphia, we've increased the number of GPS technology. This was low-hanging fruit that for years we just kind of glossed over and didn't do what we were supposed to do, but thank you, Julie, for banging us over the head at budget time to make sure that we paid attention to this. We had traveled to State Road and met with dozens of inmates. At least 1/3 of them were there because they could not afford $100 to come home. Nonviolent offenders that were incarcerated for $100. We spend, and we argue about the figure, somewhere around $100 to $122 a day to incarcerate. So whether you are a conservative member of this body who are bean counters and want to save the taxpayers' money, or whether you are a compassionate individual that just wants to open the doors of the jail and let everybody go, we have something for everyone here. There's a reason to engage in this process. We have, as a committee, started the process of evaluating day reporting centers. I'm not allowed to tell about that, Julie. I am? It's okay? I don't want to be out of... But we are looking at how we can, during the course of a day, allow individuals not to lose their life, whether it's their homes, whether it's their jobs, but fulfill their commitment to society. We're looking at how to balance those things in a day reporting center concept. My good friend here gave about a 20-minute tirade. I think it was 20 minutes. I didn't time it. But that resulted in us bringing DHS in and stop the unfair levying of wages and paying for juvenile court proceedings. And some of those fines followed those juveniles into adulthood. This man right here made a difference in a way that will be profound over generations. So in that process, we look for other issues to discuss, other ways to be helpful, other ways to make an impact on the day-to-day lives of not just those individuals who are accused of crime or who are coming home from serving sentences, but society in general, because it impacts us all. So with that, can you read the title of the resolution to be heard today, Ms. Williams?
Resolution number 170838, a resolution authorizing the Special Committee on Criminal Justice Reform to hold hearings regarding the role of a bail fund in Philadelphia.
Would any of the members of the committee like to give an opening statement? Ms. Wertheimer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilman Green, for the opportunity to make this statement before we hear from the witnesses. And I look forward to hearing about the members of the community's efforts in their advocacy for bail reform and to also provide bail relief through community bail funds. Bail funds can absolutely serve as a grassroots complement and temporary measure to many of the efforts at reform currently being undertaken by the system. Since July of 2015, the criminal justice partners in Philadelphia have reduced the population by about 17% now.
17?
Yes.
I stand corrected.
As of this morning. Well, it fluctuates. It fluctuates. And we aim to achieve further reductions totaling at least 34% by May of 2019. Part of those efforts are the development of alternatives to the current money bail system. Programs like early bail review, pretrial advocates, updated electronic monitoring, which the councilman mentioned, and a new pretrial risk assessment tool are all in different phases of implementation, and I believe will be discussed in more detail by one of today's panels. But cash bail reform alone will not significantly reduce our jail population, and safely, which is why there are 19 different initiatives under the MacArthur Grant, and many more beyond the grant through CJAB like day reporting. I mention these things because it's important to set the context for the conversation, as are the data. Of the 6,698 individuals on State Road as of this morning, about 30% are pretrial, and when you exclude the 5% who are currently charged with murder, who are automatically detained without bail, that leaves about 25% of the jail population that are held on cash bail. Of these, only 1 in 10, or about 2.5% of the overall jail population, which is roughly 170 people based on this morning's figures, have a bail of about $5,000 or less, which means posting $500. This is the universe that I assume these bail funds are mostly seeking to address, but I look forward to learning more about that and about the impact that they're making.
Thank you. Seeing no other members of the committee wishing to give a statement, I'd like to hear from the author of this resolution, Councilman Derek Green.
Thank you, Councilman and Chairman Jones, to all the members of the Special Committee. Thank you for this opportunity. I want to thank you for the work that you've been doing over the past number of months on this issue of criminal justice reform. A number of the things that you've been doing have made some impact here in the city of Philadelphia. I want to commend you for your work and your time in being focused on this issue. I've had an interesting career in my life. I've been both an assistant district attorney here in the city of Philadelphia and also an assistant attorney general in the Delaware Department of Justice. And so being a former prosecutor and just reflecting on the issues of criminal justice reform, but also more importantly regarding the concept of cash bail. And so when you have people, and Councilman Jones, you talked about having visited State Road. As a former prosecutor, I've spent a lot of time up in that on State Road. And the concern I have is that when you have someone that allegedly committed crime based on probable cause, but then still is sitting basically in an incarcerated position because they can't afford to be released, that's an issue. And so because of that issue, I think, and there's been a number of jurisdictions who moved away from having cash bail, But until we get to that point, we need to have some type of bridge. And so from my perspective, having conversation about bail funds provide an opportunity to provide that bridge to a point where we may not have cash bail in the future. And so the goal of this resolution is to continue this conversation, seeing what's happening both at the national level, other jurisdictions, and also what's happening here in the city of Philadelphia. And when you think about, and I'll just give you some information from the resolution that was drafted that's being heard today. Now today, 1 in 4 of the people in the world who are incarcerated in the United States, despite only having 5% of the world's population. Nationally, an average of 700,000 people are held in jails each day because they cannot afford bail, with women representing the fastest growing group of incarcerated people in the United States, and black and trans women being especially vulnerable. For example, black women are twice as likely to be incarcerated as white women. Whereas 8 of 10 women that are incarcerated are mothers, and half are incarcerated in local jails, mainly because they cannot afford to pay bail, which undermines a woman's ability to take care of her children, hold a steady job, and maintain stable housing. And Philadelphia has the 4th highest incarceration rate of the nation's 50 largest cities, with nearly 6 out of every 1,000 residents behind bars, and most of those in the prison system population awaiting jail. And so, today, having a conversation on bail funds, I think, as I said a few moments ago, provides that bridge into a point when we may no longer have cash bail. I want to thank the various advocates and others who are here to testify. I know we'll have representatives from the Brooklyn Bail Fund, ACLU of Pennsylvania, our colleagues and comrades in the State House, State Representative Jordan Harris and State Representative JoAnna McClinton, who I know is here right now. Our city controllers also weighed in on bail funds. The First Judicial District, the Public Defender's Office, District Attorney's Office, as well as at the more local grassroots level from Black Lives Matters, the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund, the No 215 Jail Coalition, Frontline Dads, as well as Power. So I think this conversation is an important conversation, and I said it's a bridge into the point where we may no longer have cash bail, but also this is also a conversation about poverty, and all of these issues are intertwined. So if you have a mother who allegedly may have committed a crime based on probable cause and now is awaiting, is now on State Road, that is an issue that may cause her to possibly lose her job. And so we need to look at how all these issues are interconnected and also make sure that we do what we can to address this. So I want to thank all of you. I see our district attorney has also arrived. So I just want to thank you for your time and thank all the advocates for being here so we can have a fruitful conversation on the role of bail funds in the city of Philadelphia.
We thank you for continuing the discussion. None of us is as smart as all of us. And we need to hear from everybody and get different points of view so that we can proceed on good, solid information when we make public policy. Lady who used to sit where I sit now, former Councilwoman Marion Tasco, said, act in haste and repent in your leisure, which was profound, and I always used to listen to that. You could appreciate that. Ms. Williams, we also have the City Controller, Alan Butkovitz, who I believe is going to testify as well today. So who do you have first, Ms. Williams?
The first panel of witnesses will be Pilar Weiss and Nyssa Taylor.
We're going to also allow our elected officials to get in a little early because they have bigger checks to bring from Harrisburg. Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
And please bring the mic close to you. Remember always, everyone, state your name for the record and your title and begin your testimony.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for the invitation to speak today. My name is Nyssa Taylor. I am from the ACLU of Pennsylvania. I provided written testimony as well, which is far more extensive, so I'm going to keep my comments to you today brief and focus on 3 issues. The constitutional rights that are impacted by cash bail, the 30% fee that the City of Philadelphia takes from everyone who pays bail, and who has the authority to effectively eradicate cash bail in Philadelphia. First, cash bail impacts constitutionally protected rights. The presumption of innocence is one of the most basic principles underlying our criminal justice system. We are innocent until proven guilty, and detaining people in jail until they have been found, before they have been found guilty of an offense, flips this fundamental principle on its head, as Councilman Green so articulately introduced. Cash bail also violates equal protection and basic notions of fairness. This system allows people with means to purchase their freedom, while those who are poor remain incarcerated. Freedom from incarceration should not depend on one's wealth or the color of one's skin. The proposed community bailout fund is a good way to help ameliorate this terrible situation, but should only be viewed as a stopgap measure in the city's quest for true reform. The 30% fee that Philadelphia currently takes from every citizen who pays bail will also impact the community bail fund. The rules of criminal procedure allow Philadelphia to keep a fee for reasonable costs, but those costs should be directly connected to the city's actual cost of administering bail. And Philadelphia's 30% is out of step with many other counties in the Commonwealth, who charge only $25 or take 3%. Sorry, can you, thank you, thanks. All right, I'll try to speak a little louder. It is troubling that the city takes from those who make bail, and even when completely exonerated, our citizens will lose large sums of money. The First Judicial District has the authority to change that fee. They also have the authority to eliminate the rules that the city, and eliminate the city's reliance on cash bail by changing the local court rules. So the Pennsylvania Supreme Court set forth a broad framework for pretrial release in the Rules of Criminal Procedure. And then under that framework, the Pennsylvania Rules of Judicial Administration give local courts the ability to create rules that administer their own court system. So every court has the authority to create their own rules to administer their own system. And that is where the rules come in that impact cash bail. So the effective eradication of monetary bail would not conflict with Supreme Court rules, and I think that's a really important point to remember. Philadelphia could eliminate cash bail today, and that would be in complete compliance with Supreme Court dictates on this subject. So the Supreme Court, the Rules of Criminal Procedure describe 5 types of release on cash bail, and of those 5 types, 4 of those types do not require someone to post bail for release. So I'm going to ask this council, and I'm going to ask the First Judicial District to create new rules that eliminate the city's unfair, inequitable reliance on money to buy freedom. Thank you.
All right. So what I'd like to do is let both panel witnesses testify, and then open up for questioning. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. Please proceed.
Sure. Is that working?
Yes.
Sorry. I'm getting over losing my voice. I wanted to make sure. Thank you, Chairman Jones and members of the committee, Councilman Green, for having us here today. My name is Pilar Weiss. I'm the director of the National Bail Fund Network. We're a project housed at the Brooklyn Community Bail Fund, which is the largest community bail fund in the country, paying about 2,000 bails, unfortunately, per year. We're a network of about 20 community bail funds that operate across the country, and we work with a wide range of bail funds, and so I wanted to come today and speak to you about sort of what that model looks like across the country, what it looks like here, that potential for being part of the efforts going forward. So we work with dozens of community bail funds that operate in a really wide range of systems. Some of them operate on a city level, a county level. There's a few that operate statewide. There's one that we participate with that's actually a national fund that operates across many states. And they also operate under a huge range of formations. There's no one model for a community bail fund. Some of them are 100% volunteer run. Some of them have full-time staffs. Some of them just pay bail. Others pay bail and also offer and connect with supportive services. My mic just do something. But despite this huge variety across the country of how community bail funds operate, they really have two common core values that all of them manifest, and I really want to stress those two. One of them is that community bail funds pay bail for folks with no judgment and no expectation. They're not a supervisory program, they're not a diversion program, they're a group of individuals from the community really wanting to uphold the presumption of innocence that our system is supposed to be built on and make sure people have their pretrial freedom. So that's the first common value that all these funds really share. The second is they all have a common goal, which is to end the money bail system. I often use the money bail system. Folks are using cash bail, interchangeable. So I think here in Philadelphia with the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund, as well as across the country with the community bail funds that are part of the network, we all see ourselves as short-term solutions, Band-Aids, right? This is not the solution to the money bail system. But they act as a temporary harm reduction intervention and are able to get people free, and I think also importantly, point to many of the issues that hopefully will be part of the solutions that you all and others in Philadelphia take on. I often say that community bail funds are kind of a canary in the coal mine. They're so close to the front end of the entry into the criminal legal system and are able to really identify some of the issues that often get hidden. So from our work with the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund so far and their bailouts as part of the National Mama's Bailout Day, we've really seen how that firsthand frontline work of bailing people out has identified many, many other additional issues. We all, I think, are clear on the injustices of the money bail system generally, but there's all these other pieces that come up when folks are bailing people out through a community bail fund. And so really understanding what the needs of the community are, whether it's services, transportation, housing, healthcare, and how the interaction with the legal system is working. So I think I would like to just leave you with that, I could answer many questions about other bail funds if that's helpful, but that the overall, we see them as a Band-Aid and we see them as a tool, and we hope that the work of the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund that's already been doing amazing work bailing folks out is really taken into consideration. We think that bail funds often have a lot to offer in really identifying what does community-centered solutions and resources that have been identified look like. So, what are the examples of the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund and other folks that may be bailing individuals out? What are they identifying? How do we start to think about the solutions for ending the money bail system, looking at what the community has identified and what the actual experiences of folks that have been bailed out, have regained their presumption of innocence, have regained their pretrial freedom, and have interacted with the system? What do they need to have a system that works going forward? So we really look forward to the fact that you all are taking such a proactive stance on this and looking at it and thinking about how the bail funds can be a temporary intervention and can really be part of the tools to identifying the right solution to ending money bail here in Philadelphia. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your testimony and putting your voice at risk here this morning. Succinctly, so this committee took a road trip to Washington, D.C., where they have not had a cash bail system for 20 years. We more recently had the state of New Jersey, who only uses bail for the last resort. In your professional opinions, where should we be? And should we, from where we are right now in the bail system, to those possibilities, where do you stand? Listen.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we need to be talking about is need. Need. We talk a lot about risk assessment, but we don't talk a lot about needs. What do people need to get to court? Do they need subways? Do they need text messages? We were both at a conference was it Wednesday? And there was an organization, Uptrust, that is doing text messaging, and they've been working with the Defender Association. And all of these other ways of communicating with people have the effect of getting people to court more effectively than cash bail for most. And I would ask the city to really start looking at how they can enter into an investigation of the need.
Now, you know I'm an elected official. That meant I ran for office, so that didn't answer my question, but we agree, that those things are important. We feel that the more we can encourage and get people into court, it does two things. One, it gives justice, and it allows us to save money instead of rescheduling trials, and I'm sure the controller has good information on how much those reschedulings cost, and so I wait on that. But so Councilman Green has put forth a model that is almost, and I'm not stereotyping it, but like a donut tire until we may get to a place where those pieces are put into place. What we noted from DC is that they spend a lot of money on the front end to do pre-entry, and they shift their funding to do things that are more restorative, in my opinion. So we're struggling with today, and over the last several hearings, it's almost like not too hot, not too cold, what's good for us. And so you can answer that.
Thank you, Councilman Jones. To your question, I would say that, the states that have made big steps forward in bail reform have done it in different ways that I think, and each place is unique. I think that the two examples that you laid out, DC and New Jersey, both have lessons that I think Philadelphia and Pennsylvania as a state can take. I think that in DC, to your point, they've really shown, because it's been so long established, what it takes to invest in pretrial services. I think that there's also questions, though, about the DC system in terms of the actual high percentage of people that are held pretrial without bond. So they don't have a cash system, but they have the ability to hold people, right? And so I think there's learnings there for Philadelphia and for Pennsylvania to think about that system has many successes, but it also has some real lessons learned about you can eliminate money bail and then actually have an increased number of people that are held pretrial with no recourse for release. I think similarly, New Jersey has been an inspiration for bail reform advocates across the country because it's been implemented. It invested in new judicial additions and systems, but I think we're also all learning from it that it uses a risk assessment tool that has some real issues, right? And that if similar kinds of systems, or if the question of how the system will release people on their own recognizance and not use money bail is established, what are the problems in the kinds of biased and racist algorithms that may be used in the New Jersey system? What kind of a tool would Philadelphia create that is very specific to the community? I think that goes back to my earlier point of really listening to what community bail funds and other advocates that have been working within the system have identified as the needs and how you can tailor a system that really meets those. But I think both offer us sort of some guideposts of where things have been tested and where Philadelphia could be even better.
Also recognizing the presence of my colleague, Councilwoman Helen Gill. Mr. Shabazz.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman Jones. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I think it was very informative. And because the presentations ought to be informative and there are people that are looking at this, there's certain things that you talked about that I want you to briefly expound upon. I have the advantage of having the written testimony, but other people do not. For example, you touched upon the constitutional right. I had a big mouth, so kind of reverberates, but you touched on the constitutional right of someone who's innocent until proven guilty being housed as if they were incarcerated. But what someone, and I don't like to say devil's advocate because I'm never a devil, but the advocacy on the other side says, well, there's also a right to public safety. So what is the argument put forth? What would you say to them with respect to that? That's the first thing. The second thing is you talked about the 30% that is taken by the city as part of a fee, if you will, when cash bail is put up. Did you have an opportunity to discover, and I think that we're going to have a chance to talk to the controller as well, where did that 30% go? What was it reinvested in? Was it reinvested in criminal justice? Was it reinvested in some of the 4 other avenues you talked about, house arrest or electronic monitoring? Where's that money and where did it go? I think that those 2 questions, if someone is sitting back and say, well, you want to let people out and I'm afraid of them coming into the neighborhood, how do you protect us constitutionally? We can address that and lay that. But the other thing is, how do we reconcile this money that was held on to by people that probably put a lot of money together to get a loved one out?
Both very good questions. So I'm going to start with your second one, and the answer is I don't know. I don't know where that money goes. I don't know how it's housed, and I think that that's something I would absolutely ask the committee to look into. With regard to the first question, you are again spot on. The Constitution, both the United States Constitution and the Pennsylvania Constitution recognize bail. The 8th Amendment prohibits excessive bail, and I think it's Section 14, Article 1 of the Pennsylvania Constitution guarantees bail not by excessive sureties, but does allow that if someone's arrested for a homicide, or if they're facing life in prison, or they are a public danger either to someone or to the community, there is a public safety aspect to it. But both of those must be proven by, and I believe it's by, it has to be shown at a hearing. And so I think one of the issues is that there are ways to protect public safety. That is not, but that's really, and I think that the city can do that, and I think other jurisdictions have shown that cash bail is actually not effective, because you can be really rich and really dangerous. And so I think that's where the issue comes in.
And I had one more question, not for you. I had a question from someone who traveled from my hometown to speak to us today. You talked about a criteria for community bail. There is some criteria with that. Is that an accurate statement, first of all, before I ask the question?
A criteria
in other words, community bail fund would assist people that don't have the ability to get out. What would the community bail fund do? And if it assists certain people, is there a criteria, is there a grid, is there something that we're looking at that makes the determination as to who is eligible and who is not? And then the last question, and I'm always concerned about it, is that we've thrown around DC since I've been on this committee, since its inception, and we learned about DC. But DC is federally funded. And so they are loaded on the front end, but they're federally funding the loading on the front end. So those counseling, all of the alcohol counseling, all of the housing counseling, all of the education is paid for. If we're doing it here and we're looking at the model, how are we going to do those things? How are we going to fund it? How are we going to deal with that? Are you able to give us something different because you have been engaged in community funding?
Thank you so much, and happy to have the Brooklyn connection there, even though you're not here. On the first question, I don't think, community bail funds establish criterias that are specific to the jurisdiction they operate and the values and which community groups are involved in them. The network that I direct, we're very open that there's not one criteria that should be followed. I think the two sort of themes that I stress is, for bail funds, one of the criteria is that if they're really a true community bail fund is to be non-judgmental and not to have some sort of hook on people or surveillance or a demand, right? People's bail is paid with no judgment. Other bail funds across the country have established all kinds of different criteria based on how they're able to relate to the system and also what their budgets are, how much money they've raised from community members, and also what their accountability to the communities they work in. So there are some bail funds, and also how much the average bail is, right? There are some bail funds that pay bails only up to $500. There are others that pay $50,000 bails, right? It really depends on what their resources are. And there's also, issues about how referrals come in. There are some bail funds that work very closely with public defender offices, and that's part of the way they coordinate. There are others that take referrals from people calling a hotline. So I think it's really, a question for the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund. They'll establish a criteria that works for them, and they can be transparent and accountable to the communities they work with, and so the system understands how it works. But there's no sort of one size fits all.
But there is a risk assessment.
No.
Okay.
No, there's no, and I think that's actually a very interesting thing that bail funds have shown. I'll use the example of the Brooklyn Community Bail Fund where I'm hosted, which is, you know, they end up paying bail for people that the system, the risk assessment tool that the system have deemed risky for failure to appear, and that's why bail has been set. But the bail funds have found that 95% of the people that they pay bail for appear at all of their court hearings, even with very little assistance, whether it's text or transportation, and their cases are dismissed at higher rates than they're disposed of. I think it points to a central underpinning that's important to sort of be clear about, which is that there's not an appearance crisis, right? And I think that we often get stuck in this discussion that people are failing to appear, and that's what we need to be worried about, and people need to be labeled as high risk for not appearing. Bail funds across the country that I work with pay bail every day for people that the system has said are high risk, and those people come to court, their cases get dismissed, their lives, you know, they're given back their presumption of innocence, and their lives are able to carry on. To answer your other question, I think about the investment in DC. I think I totally agree with you that DC has a very different model because of the investment and the funding. I think that there has been a real discussion across the country about the sort of invest-divest model, right? Of there's all this money in the system right now, and you know, speaking about, you gave a good example of the 30% fee. Is that money being taken out and invested in community-centered resources that actually meet the needs of folks?
So if I could, we used to have a clerk recorder sessions that used to be responsible for bail. I won't go into a great deal of detail about the way that was administered, but we did in these chambers have hearings about that. Story for another day. That then was dissolved and put into the first judicial district's area of responsibility. It's my understanding that that 30% goes back into the first judicial's budget. One of the things that we have pending is a Criminal Justice Reinvestment Act. And what we're looking at, and we held up on it, but it is not gone, that when we save money from these reductions, whether it's the 17% of a reduction from the incarcerated individuals on State Road, or we save money in other areas, that some portion of that should go to pre-entry, things to keep people out of prison, and here's why. Mr. Shabazz is absolutely correct. DC is funded by the federal government, so they have the Cadillac version of pre-entry, the Bentley version of pre-entry.
If that Cadillac didn't fall out.
Right. So there's a Hugo rendition of that, and then there's probably something in the middle that we can strive for. And what we are beginning to believe is some rendition of those level of services can be funded through redirection of existing funds. Because if you are a prison guard now, you may be someone who deals with house arrest individuals later. So if a prison guard and a social worker had a baby, they would be that new job description to be able to really deal with the evolution of justice reform. And so so there's a whole nother hearing and discussion and levels of debates during our budget process to figure out the model that we can afford. So today we want to do good, but we sure better know how much doing good costs, because we just have to. We're going to, go ahead.
Richard McSorley, I'm the representative of the FJD, the Deputy Court Administrator. We're going to have the FJD testify, so I'm not going to belabor a lot of points. I just want to point out, I agree that the FJD may be able to eliminate cash bail, but we have had this discussion with judicial leadership. It's not as clear cut that we could just turn around tomorrow and change the rules of criminal procedure and create a local rule. The discussion is ongoing, but I just want to put it out there. It's not like the FJD knows it and we just decided not to do it. We are discussing it.
For Reverend Adan Mairena, West Kensington Ministry, to hear you say that you don't know where that 30% fee, like what it goes to, just, perhaps I got lost here, but that really concerns me, especially when that 30%, a lot of it is very disproportionately affects the poor more. So to hear that we don't know where it goes towards, it just really bothers me. And if we don't know where it goes for in our county, where does it go to in other counties? And if you don't have that information, is it because you didn't ask, or is it because that information's withheld? Or, and if there's a ballpark figure, what would that be?
And let me be clear, I don't know personally. We have not filed a Freedom of Information Act, and the First Judicial District may be able to articulate that, so I don't want to put that on them.
That's not, she wouldn't know our internal budget process, so I'll take you off the hook on that, all right?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Have you conducted any kind of empirical research to measure the success of the bail funds across the country? What works and what doesn't work?
Yeah, we have sort of combined data. I mean, I think we have a little bit of contention with what success looks like, right? Since we're at a Band-Aid. Across the country, bail funds on average, about 95% of the people they pay for come back to all their court dates and complete their cases, right? So this goes to the point I was, to Mr. El-Shabazz's question about, you know, people who are categories as high risk but complete it. We also have data that shows about people whose bail is paid by bail funds have twice the rate of having their case dismissed. And that correlates with, I think, some national data that's been put together over the years showing that if you are able to fight your case or be free during the, after the charge, it gets dismissed at a higher rate. I think other than that, different bail funds measure their success based on, is the end of money bail coming faster? Are they able to support folks that come out and maybe finish their court case and it gets dismissed, but they're still homeless or they still have other challenges? And I think that's where we don't have good empirical data that we've been able to necessarily be successful in that range. But in terms of getting people out and having their cases resolved at very favorable rates and return to court, those numbers are there.
So Madam District Attorney.
Thank you. One quick question, and I believe when we engage in discussions as important as this, and this one definitely is one and probably long overdue, I always look to a foundational question. So how would each of you define bail? What is bail? Because we're looking to reform it, we're discussing reforming it, but what is it? And each of you may have a different definition of what bail is, so can you tell me?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and I think this is where we can look to the rules of criminal procedure. They define bail as release on your own recognizance, release on special conditions, release on nominal bail, which is $1, release on unsecured monetary bail, so you don't have to post anything, but you have a bond where that if you fail to appear. And finally, the last one is release on cash, so posting cash for release. So I think within that broad rubric of bail, as defined by our Supreme Court, there's a lot of room to work with. Thank you.
Thank you, District Attorney. And I would just build on Nyssa's comments. I mean, I think I define bail as there's a number. It can be money bail, but there's other forms, right, of exchanged property money to be able to be free during your case, right? And so I think that's, in our dialogue, it's any money bail, but also being clear about ending other forms of, that would hold people in and not lead to release.
Ms. Weiss, just a quick question. In Brooklyn, for the individuals for whom the Brooklyn Bail Fund covers their bail, what is the either average or typical length of time to case disposition?
That's a great question. It really varies. I think on average right now it's about 9 months. And New York is unique in those New York's bail funds, and there's one in Brooklyn and one in Bronx, or two in Brooklyn actually, that they're only allowed to pay for misdemeanors because of a state law around charitable organizations. The rest of the country, bail funds pay for felonies and misdemeanors. So that's about a 9-month disposition. I know that the Massachusetts bail fund that's been paying bail for about 4 years, they've recently seen disposition lengths go on for 2+ years on average.
And so then a follow-up case, so the issue we have is, so in New York, I know I actually have your CJA data in front of me, right? And I know that 50% of cases in the 5 boroughs achieve disposition at what we would call in Pennsylvania preliminary arraignment. So 50% of cases in New York City are disposed of either because they're dismissed or because a plea is accepted, essentially within 24 to 48 hours. In Philadelphia, 25% of our cases are concluded within 90 days. In other words, 75% of our cases go on past 90 days. So the pretrial period here is excessive compared to other jurisdictions, and that poses a problem for having people show up for court cases, because it's not like, oh, I have one appearance next week. It's like, I'm going to have some appearance whenever, going on for an extended period of time. So it poses an additional issue for us here, unless we take the primary step of shortening our time to disposition, which is possible. So my second question is, how many people that you provide funds to have multiple cases open?
You know, I don't have a good number.
In your general sense?
You know, I don't. There's a variance across bail funds. I would say
In
probably
Brooklyn?
at least a quarter, right, if not more. I would say, to your point, though, I think that about multiple court dates is very, very important, right? Like in New York City, in Brooklyn and Manhattan, where the Brooklyn Community Bail Fund pays bail, for misdemeanors, often people will have 12 or 13 court appearances, right? And this goes to the question of somebody has been marked as high risk because they missed a couple of court appearances in the past, so they've now been, you know, it's been scored that they have a failure to appear issue, but it was because they missed 2 out of 10. They came late. They were working, they're raising their children, and that's the way the court length is working.
So we have this added issue in Philadelphia, which is that because our court process is so long and cumbersome and takes forever to dispose of a case, for a variety of reasons, people often have multiple cases open, and then what happens is when they miss an appearance, they get what we call in Pennsylvania terms a detainer. So the data that Julie provided me earlier is that about 50% of individuals who are in our jail, it's a little less than that because of the way the data is coded, have both an open case in which they're detained pre-trial, but also have this detainer lodge for a previous case. Oh, correct my data.
Can I jump in and correct that? It's that they have some sort of detainer. About 2/3 of the detainer population may have an open case, but there are other kinds of detainers, like mental health detainers. So I just wanted to correct that for the record.
Sure. So there's a portion of, there's a larger portion, and I think you sort of get to the point of is failure to appear because someone wishes to abscond from a jurisdiction and not face the consequences for alleged criminal behavior, or is it because the bureaucracy has made it very, very difficult to appear? And I'll just give an example of when, in a prior role, when I was a researcher, first at the Vera Institute in New York and then at the Pew Charitable Trust here in Philly, and I was doing a study on the use of bail here in Philadelphia. I spent a lot of time in court. And one of the things that I saw repeatedly was people having 2 appearances scheduled in 2 different courtrooms at the same time. Now, I don't believe that this happens all the time, but I certainly saw it more than once, and so then you have someone with a failure to appear simply because they're appearing for one of their court hearings. And I know a lot has gone on since I did my work. There's great improvement due to everybody here, but I just want to move the spotlight a little to another issue that comes into play, which is a very long and very cumbersome court process.
Thank you for that. I want to recognize the councilwoman first and then the author of this resolution. Councilwoman?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Councilwoman. First of all, I want to thank the committee for having this hearing, and especially my colleague, Councilman Green, for proposing this very important issue. I think we have a lot to learn here. I think I've been very much of an advocate in believing that, particularly when we deal with the stage of someone's process through the justice system, where we're in the stage of presumption, presumed innocent before guilty, that what we don't want to do is criminalize poverty, not only just end reduce the amount of incarceration, but we really do not want to criminalize poverty. And I appreciated particularly the recognition that we have multiple ways in which we can hold people accountable to appearances that go beyond cash bail. So one of the things that I am interested in, just from the study that you've done on the national level, has been just to go into I think you touched on this a little bit, but this question of whether the provision of a community bail fund, how is it informing the ending of cash bail systems in those cities, and how soon does that tend to happen? Are people uncovering particular barriers to it, or are they moving towards the elimination of cash bail if a community bail fund were to open?
I mean, I think that there's been multiple waves historically of community bail funds. The most, right, and the previous ones did not end the money bail system, unfortunately. I think the current, the 20 or so bail funds that I work with have mostly been in operation for 5 years or less. And I don't think anybody has so far successfully ended a money bail system, but I think in many cases they've been able to highlight issues that then have been part of the solutions that are being worked through, right? So I'll give an example. In Chicago, there's the Chicago Community Bond Fund. There's been a recent judicial court order there that no bonds can be set that are unaffordable. That bond fund, they call themselves a bond fund because of the nuance of the system in Cook County. They have been pushing their data and the experience of people they bonded out to help get to that rule. And then since that rule has been implemented, they've been able to show that it's actually not being implemented well, right? Because they're still having to bond people out. So there's a review process that was established to say affordability must be considered, yet the bond fund is daily seeing people with unaffordable bail. And so I think there's that ability to sort of push the system forward to make sure that the solutions, when they get to implementation, are true, as well as I think there's many cases, and I think the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund here already, in the bailout work they've done, can sort of highlight where there are problems in the system that have to be part of the solution. In Brooklyn and the Bronx and Manhattan, where a number of bail funds operate, New York City and New York State have not ended the money bail system, but they've been making some incremental changes, many of them that have been informed by the data and the experience of the bailouts that the bail funds have done.
And in your opinion, have you felt that community bail funds are an essential component of moving towards, moving us towards a more approach towards reducing money out of the system, or do you feel like they're kind of, like they enable wrongful systems to kind of continue for longer by providing, for example, an alternative that relieves people's immediate circumstances but doesn't necessarily tackle the underlying problem?
I think it's a great question. I think that's our concern and fear, all of us that work with community bail funds. We don't want to exist, right? So I don't think that it's like something that people should say, we need to have a bail fund in order to get to reform and to ending money bail. I think that the bail funds that work across the network I direct have a concern of not wanting to be normalized as a solution, right? And not wanting to be seen as a way to offload the pressure of actually getting rid of the system. And so I think that's why being part of community partnerships and dialogues of what is the experience and the data that bail funds are seeing, informing a very active and hopefully rapid conversation about dismantling the system.
And then just a comment, but, it sounds like from your research that the Community Bail Fund affirmatively shows that the problems that exist with cash bail exist, and they're exposing them and making clear, and maybe they can move towards incremental reforms, but it is affirmatively showing that we've got existing problems with cash bail that exist, period, and the central question is, do we have a bail system that is going to rely on people's capacity to pay or not, and whether that is truly a system of justice that we're willing to stand by. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman. We're going to go to Councilman Green, and then we're going to get the next group to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Weiss, I have just some quick questions in reference to the operation of community bail funds. For some of these bail funds, what's the average budget? How do they deal with issues like surety? And you talked a little bit about Cook County, but I'm curious about what the role of cities have been in reference to some of the community bail funds, if there's been any role involvement at all.
Yes, thank you, Councilman Green. There's the current wave, there's a history of different kinds of bail funds, and actually, I think in the 80s there was a Philadelphia People's Bail Fund that actually the city gave some money to, and I'm sure people here on this committee, and there's somebody nodding their head, know the history of that. So I think there's been points when cities and counties have put money into bail funds as a way to reduce the number of people being held pretrial. The budgets of community bail funds really range. There's bail funds that are operating on, $20,000 a year. There's bail funds that have a $2 million budget, right, based on how much bail they pay and how much they have in their revolving fund, right, which is where they're paying bail out of, and then whether they have also an operating budget, because some bail funds are purely volunteer, others have paid staff and may have paid social workers and other folks who help bridge to support services for the people that get bailed out. So I think it's really, I'm sorry that I keep giving these very vague answers and it's a huge range, but I think it really is dependent on the model that the fund uses. In terms of sureties, I think based on different city and county and state laws, some bail funds have had to have a partnership with the surety to back them. Others are able to just operate as a nonprofit, and since they're paying cash bail and they're not serving as a bond agent, they don't have to have that backing. It's called bond in Cook County, but they're really actually paying a percentage of a total amount. So it's pretty much really the money bail system, so they don't have a backing of a surety.
And so for the bail funds, how did some of these funds get started from a funding perspective? And what is their ongoing source of funding going forward?
It's a mixture. A lot of bail funds are funded by individual donations, right, in a range of small and large. A number of bail funds receive philanthropic foundation support. I think in the past there have been bail funds that have maybe received city or county grant money, and I think there's a real question there. Oftentimes, community bail funds, if they want to truly be community and not a city-run or county-run bail fund, have only accepted public money if it doesn't stipulate who they have to bail out, particularly since I think we've all discussed here, the system itself can change, and not wanting to have to pay the system with its own money to bail people out has been sort of a contradiction that community bail funds have not wanted to take on. So I think it's a mixture, and I think, again, oftentimes bail funds may have secured public, supported or foundation money to do some of the operational work, right, to pay staff, especially if there's a position that is liaising with the system around support services, and then use individual and foundation contributions to raise the revolving funds. And I think I just would want to point to the amount of fee is always an issue too, right? I think the amount of money that a revolving bail fund can keep replenishing once cases are disposed of and the money comes back is affected by how much is taken out by fees. So the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund will have to contend, unless an accommodation is made, with a 30% fee. In New York City, for instance, there's a 3% fee that is taken after about a year and a half of operation. The city began to waive that for the community bail funds in New York City. So it's an issue to address.
And final question, are you aware of any bail funds that have had any involvement with either social impact bonds or pay for success bonds?
I'm not aware, there are some bail funds that have been on the bail fund corpus side, so the revolving money, not their operational money, have been starting to experiment with PRIs, and so having some sort of credit line that helps them extend the amount of money they have available to revolve.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Ms. Williams, can you please read the next group of witnesses to testify?
State Representative JoAnna McClinton and City Controller Alan Butkovitz.
That's why they were able to disband it. Thank you guys for your patience. We appreciate you. Hopefully you got some of the context of what we're dealing with and wrestling with here in Philadelphia. So I'm going to go with, Mr. Controller, I'm going to go with the state. They issue bigger checks when they come and help our city. So, Representative?
Thank you. Comes off. Good morning, Chairman, Councilman Jones. Good morning to our district attorney. Good morning to the sponsor of the resolution and to everyone who's a part of this committee. My name is JoAnna McClinton, and my colleague, Representative Jordan Harris, the chairman of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, was unable to make it this morning. I'm here today because this is an issue that's been very important to me for several reasons. Prior to joining the Pennsylvania legislature, I spent 7 years working right here in Philly at the Defender Association of Philadelphia. For 6 of those years, I was actually trial counsel representing people. 75% of the people who are charged with crimes in Philadelphia are represented by my former employer. And in those 7 years representing people, 6 years actually being trial counsel and 1 year being a zone chief, I found many times judges would tell me, well, counsel, the bail's low. It's like, well, the bail's not low enough because Mr. or Miss so-and-so is still in jail and nobody wants to be there, Your Honor. Interesting. I understand you think the bail was set low, it's within the quote-unquote guidelines, but nobody wants to be there. And the reality in Philadelphia is it's terrible to be charged with a crime anywhere in the world. But if you're poor and you're in Philadelphia, you're in one of the worst situations ever, because it's likely that you may already have a record, which means you will have a detainer from whoever your back judge is, where you're serving probation and or parole. And the other thing is your life begins to fall apart. If you were able to pick up pieces and find an employer that we know many here in the city don't actually pay living wages, but if you have an employer, if you have somewhere that you're living, if you're not out on the street, one of the many people who are homeless in this city, all of that changes when you get charged with a crime, because of course you go through our city's pretrial unit and the bail commissioner makes a determination on what bail should be set. Once bail is set, you may not get into an actual courtroom for quite a little bit of time, depending on what your charges are. For misdemeanors, it's a little while that you won't get into court, and of course for felonies, the first preliminary hearing is usually scheduled within 2 weeks. That being said, this issue is not something that I'm unfamiliar with because of my years practicing law here. And of course, joining the legislature, it's like, what can we do statewide to make sure that the people that I once served and represented as counsel don't have to continue to fall into this cycle where their life falls apart, where you lose your job, you lose your housing, and in many instances, you may lose your family, you may lose your children if you're a sole caregiver. So that being said, I am familiar with the things that our managing director, Judge Lerner, has taken up, and I've met with Julie, and of course the councilman, the chairman here, Curtis Jones, knows that I have a bill on pretrial bail. It's House Bill 1092, and earlier this year we had a hearing in my district in Southwest Philadelphia from various stakeholders that offered their opinion on bail. We all know that bail is to ensure that you show up for court. It's not to punish you, it's not to end your life, it's to make sure that you show up for court. That is the purpose of bail, and of course, not just to make sure you show up to court, but to also keep the community safe. you're showing up to court, and the community is safe. So those are the main objectives. So the bill that I have, it's House Bill 1092, and it is currently in the Judiciary Committee. I introduced it in the spring of this year, and it is a bill on Pennsylvania pretrial and bail procedure reform. What this legislation does, if enacted, it does not mandate, I see someone over there that I met with often. It doesn't mandate anything from any of the counties in Pennsylvania, any of the 67 counties, but it does encourage all of the counties to follow the practice that was started in Allegheny County, where they have most of the people charged with crimes who are let out of jail showing up to court. It's no long amounts of failures to appear, bench warrants, what happens in Philadelphia where people don't make it to court over and over and over again. In Allegheny County, what they have implemented at the pretrial level is a risk assessment. This risk assessment considers several things. It considers whether or not the person has any propensity towards violence that has been demonstrated through certainly the charges in front of the judge, and then also any criminal record or history if it exists. They consider the person's propensity towards violence, and they also consider, of course, the safety of the community and how that should be balanced. They also look at whether or not this person needs any sort of support. When I say support specifically, whether they need diversion into a mental health outpatient program or whether they need a drug treatment program, and none of this pretrial situation affects what will happen later in terms of the case, the disposition, the adjudication, justice, etc. None of it has any bearing or relation. This bill, if implemented, will simply encourage the counties to adopt this model. Because if counties adopt this model, as you'll hear from our controller, counties will save money. And of course, when you look at what's happening in Harrisburg with the large deficit we made attempts to fill, everybody is trying to save money. Municipal government, state government, federal government, I won't mention them today. So everybody else is making efforts to save money and to be efficient. And as a lifelong Philadelphian, I don't want to admit it, but it's been 3 decades.
It's okay.
It's okay, all right, I'll take it. These 3 decades, it's important to me to live in a safe neighborhood, right? I park my car on 60th Street and walk around the corner to my house. So I want to make sure that I live in a safe neighborhood, not just because of me, but because of my mom, because of the lady across the street, because of the kids down the block. Like, we all want to live in a safe community, but living in a safe community cannot mean that every poor person that's charged with a crime has to then spend 2 years in State Road in terrible conditions depending on where you're housed, waiting for the outcome of justice. Thank you.
Representative, thank you. I had an opportunity to go out to Pittsburgh, and I think it's important to note they have an adult rendition of that and a youth rendition of that, and the use of day reporting is strategic within that. So people are released. There are always consequences to whatever act, but they aren't disruptive in these individuals' lives. So a kid still goes to school, an adult still goes to work, they still pay their rent, and their life is judged later, but not at the point of arrest. And so for you to example Allegheny County, which is Pittsburgh, is a good example of one of the options. It's not the Hugo, it's not the Bentley, it might be the Ford. And they're able, what was interesting in that trip was also the the prison commissioner is a female, and not that that matters, but I asked her a direct question. I said, aren't you afraid you're gonna work yourself out of a job? And she said, my job is to work myself out of a job. And if we can close a prison and we can do it and keep the public safe, it's worth it. And that was the most courageous administrative thing, because what we tend to do is protect our silos. We tend to say, you know what, my pension, my longevity, my job depends on keeping people incarcerated. When you're bold enough to say, I can evolve with what's going on, If any of you get a chance to go to Pittsburgh and see what they're doing out there, they're leading the way on a lot of the criminal justice reform stuff. I recommend the trip. So thank you. Stick around. We have questions. Mr. Controller.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chairman Jones, members of the Special Committee on Criminal Justice Reform. I'm Alan Butkovitz, Philadelphia City Controller, and I'm here to testify about our office's recent study on the economic impact of cash bail in the city of Philadelphia. The purpose of our study was to assess the impact of a city program on both the economic and fiscal health of the city. While we acknowledge that much great work has been done by the past and present administrations under the MacArthur Initiative, and that progress continues to be made in lowering Philadelphia's dubious distinction as a city with one of the highest rates of incarceration in the country, we wanted to understand the impact of the existing bail system in 2017 on individuals, families, and taxpayers. The costs are substantial at every level. As an independent watchdog agency, we followed our usual process. We asked relevant city and state departments and agencies for data, which included the Philadelphia Department of Prisons and the Administration of Pennsylvania Courts, and analyzed the numbers they provided. All data and research is sourced throughout the report. Our study examined the economic implications of the cash bail system by comparing both the direct and indirect costs of incarceration against cash bail alternatives. It also examined cost implications, underscoring the problem's severity and need for reform. Our key takeaway: cash bail can be reduced or eliminated at a substantial cost savings to the city of Philadelphia. Some of the other key findings presented in our study included, of the 4,359 total offenders held pre-trial, nearly 33% are held because they cannot afford cash bail. 1 in 3 could be released on less than $5,000. The direct and indirect costs to those jailed and their families total $531 a day. This includes the loss of income, loss of housing, child care costs, loss of tax revenue, and social services. Eliminating cash bail could reduce the prison population by 1,800, allowing the city to examine closing unnecessary facilities and saving up to $75 million annually. Research has found current systems can cause more damage on the incarcerated and their families than benefit, whereas alternatives may be just as effective yet provide better futures for those in the criminal justice system. As indicated in Resolution 170838 presented before us today, the elimination of the cash bail system is a Commonwealth legislative issue. However, it is incumbent upon the city to explore ways of bridging the gap between our current unacceptable system and a future without cash bail. Councilman Curtis Jones is to be commended for taking the lead in exploring these efforts for our city. Major cities across the United States are looking at innovative ways to manage pretrial defendants, balancing the need to ensure justice is served and maintaining public safety, while evaluating the long-term impacts of incarceration and correction of the offender. The City of Philadelphia must restructure, reinvest, and remove barriers for true reform to occur. We need to look to the future and close antiquated, unsafe, and costly facilities while developing preventive programs that deter youth from crime. Thank you.
And thank you for your work in this regard. Ms. Wertheimer.
Thank you. I just want to clarify a few statements. It's important to note that it's about 170 people who could be released on $500 or less based on current stats. And the pretrial population...
Yeah, my comment was $5,000.
Well, I assume you meant a $5,000 bail, which would be released on $500 or less.
Yeah, well, we have a very vast disparity in our understanding of the numbers that are impacted by that. We have thousands of people, and you're minimizing this for some reason at 170.
I'm not minimizing it. I think we all agree on the premise of your report that there are significant collateral consequences to a cash bail system that need to be addressed, that impact people's homes and families. We agree on that, and we've said it publicly. I'm just pointing out the numbers of the impact of moving away from a cash bail system are important to keep in context because we are moving towards that. But there are other issues, like detainer issues, like violations of probation, that are actually larger drivers of our jail population that we're also looking aggressively to address. And so I just want to put that conversation in context and also point out that by reducing the population 1,800, we couldn't close 2 facilities. We couldn't even close 1 facility based on projections. We need to get to a level of 4,800 to close House of Corrections, which is the first facility on everyone's radar, and 1,800 would not get us to a population of 4,800. To close DC, we'd have to get even lower than that. The MacArthur goal of 34% is only 5,300. So we're aiming towards that, and we aim to go lower, but I think it's important to manage expectations of what the timeline is for realistic achievement of reform. So, and I think...
Thank you. Mr. Butkovitz, I have enormous respect for you for a long time. I think your numbers are wrong in this case, but I think whether or not or to what extent they're wrong is really fairly irrelevant to the central focus of our discussion and this hearing today, because I think we all start off with the proposition that if there are 10 people or 5 people or 1 person in pretrial custody who doesn't have to be there for reasons of either public safety or a really serious likelihood of failure to appear, that's too many. And we need to be doing something about it. And I think that's why we're all here today. Representative McClinton, you and I have some things in common. And one of the most significant I think, for purposes of this hearing is that because we have the same former employer, we both have shared the experience of representing people, not merely one at a time, but over lengthy shifts at preliminary arraignment court, where bail is originally set. And I think we also agree on the basic premise that no individual charged with a crime should be incarcerated pre-trial unless a neutral judicial authority finds, after an evidentiary hearing in which the defendant is represented by counsel, that there is a sufficiently great danger to public safety or a sufficiently great likelihood that if the person is released, they will not appear. Am I right so far?
That's correct, Your Honor.
All right. So I want to ask you by way of a question. I want to propose the outline of a pretrial release determination hearing and see whether or not you think that fits in with what you are and your colleagues are trying to accomplish through your legislation. We know, you and I certainly know, that one of the problems that is not generally discussed in this area but has plagued the Philadelphia criminal justice system for many years is the need not only to have a fair and just determination of whether somebody should be released after their arrest, but to have a prompt determination. There are a lot of jurisdictions, including a lot of places around the state, that don't and never have and never will operate 24/7 preliminary arraignment courts, and where people wait not hours but days for an appearance before a bail setting authority. And that's not something. We've made tremendous strides in Philadelphia in speeding up that initial hearing process from the way it used to be, certainly from the way it used to be even when I was doing midnight to 8 a.m. shifts down at the Roundhouse. And we don't want to go back on that. Suppose we had a generally acceptable, usable risk assessment tool for pretrial release, and a system that provided every defendant at preliminary arraignment with counsel in order to advocate for release, as well as the Commonwealth's representation. Do you think it would be fair and appropriate if we had a system, if that system also consisted of a preliminary arraignment procedure at which the judicial authority presiding simply made an initial determination based on the evidence before him or her of in or out? In or out being determined by the evidence on the factors of public safety and failure to appear. And then there was a process that provided both parties, the DA as well as defense, who, if they were dissatisfied with the initial determination, to, within a matter of days, have a full hearing on the issue, simply on the issue of whether or not, on the basis of the standards that we've been talking about, whether or not the individual should be detained or released pending trial. How would that system fit in with what you are trying to accomplish with your proposed legislation?
So what you just referenced, Your Honor, I think would actually fit in with my legislation. One of the concerns I initially had when you were posing your question with the volume that's in Philadelphia, will this actually occur fairly? I did not do as many arraignment shifts as you probably did, Judge Lerner. But in my arraignment shifts, everything just was always happening so quickly. I mean, families calling, picking up the phone, it's like nothing is going on for a few hours, and then the bail commissioner comes out and 200 people, bail is set for 200 people in what feels like 10 minutes. It's not 10 minutes, but it's very, very quickly. So I don't know if that initial stage, the way it occurred when I was at the Defender, and I'm not familiar with how it is happening today, as of right now. But when I was there and when I was in the basement of the Justice Stout Center, everything was happening so quickly. I do not believe there was enough time to really make a serious decision of in or out. What are the guidelines? What are the charges? Many times, not only did the defender person or the assistant defender, whomever was there from the office, not have a chance to advocate, but even the person representing the district attorney's office in that very quick time did not have an opportunity, because the commissioners are often on autopilot, moving at lightning speed to get through this huge volume, hundreds of people that, haven't waited days and weeks, but have been waiting for 20 hours. So, okay, let's get these people who've been waiting 20 hours sent up the state road or sent home right now. Now, if it also included what you stated in the second portion, which is within 5 days, a hearing to actually go and present and say, I'm not actually satisfied with that outcome, and now you're going to take at least 3 minutes and listen to what I have to say and review what it is I have to present, whether it's a W-2 or whatever it might be, because I don't believe the way our arraignment system was happening as recently as 4 years ago when I left the office, that it allows for that time to advocate.
I agree with you that the process that we've seen at the original bail setting, at the preliminary arraignment, would need enormous improvement. It would need to become a judicial proceeding, and we would have to, the city and the first judicial district would have to commit the resources in funding and in personnel to make that happen. But clearly, that's doable if we have the will and the desire to do it, and if we believe that that's the first step in a fair process. And I specifically, because of what you have noted, would include an absolute mandatory, prompt, full judicial bail review hearing that would be available, as I said, to either side. Because the Commonwealth, and as you said, your neighbors and you and I have an interest not only in seeing that people who don't have to be detained pre-trial are not detained, but also in seeing that people who pose a danger to the community, a provable danger to the community, don't have to be released. So both sides would have to have access to that appeal process. So you think we could do that?
I think with your leadership and direction and experience on every side of this matter, it could certainly be implemented and be successful, because that's what's key, is both sides really having the opportunity. That's why I wanted to make it clear that in arraignment now, even the district attorney's office doesn't say minimal, doesn't say much, because the commissioners are on autopilot. It's like a lightning speed. Next, 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 next. 2,500, 20,000, 10,000, 100,000. When in many instances, given the pretrial rules of procedure for the state, people can just be held without bail. Like, that can be the decision, as opposed to making it a high monetary amount to say, hey, do you have enough money to get this out? It shouldn't be about that. It should, if you're posing a real danger to the community, there should be no bail. Stay, wait for the process to happen. I don't want to run into you by accident on a bad day, or my granny too. So, you should just be held without bail. But if it's just a contest to figure out who can get to $20,000, 10%, have everybody trying to scrape it up, I mean, it's just not fair the way it occurs.
We agree. Thank you.
Wow. Good insight. Thank you both for sharing this. And again, these hearings matter as we shape public policy. And my granny and your granny need to be able to go to 60th Street. We share that district. I get the north side, you at the south side, but we want to be safe on all sides. And so thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have a question.
Commissioner.
As a 24-year prison employee, as a social worker, social work supervisor, and I left as an executive, I want to publicly apologize for any situation that anyone that goes to jail confronts. But I can assure you that our correctional officers and our treatment staff, social workers, are caring, compassionate individuals that are there to do a job. My question to the representative is, when we talk about Allegheny County, do we measure the socio-economic situation versus the socio-economic situation of Philadelphia?
That's a good question. Thank you for your service, first and foremost, for 24 years. I cannot imagine what that was like for 24 years to serve people on the inside and provide them access to treatment and other programs that were necessary to ensure that their time on State Road was safe and productive, and to what amount of rehabilitation could be achieved. You spearheaded that process, so thank you. In regards to the comparison, I must admit that I have not done a comparison to the socioeconomic outcomes or whether or not they're as poor as we are. We know we're leading the nation in Philly, unfortunately, with the rates of poverty. I was at a meeting yesterday morning at the University of Penn where their government relations person said, well, this is the city with the most institutions of higher learning, yet the highest rate of poverty and the lowest amount of attainment of higher education by people like me who are from Philly. People like me who are from Philly, we don't go to college because we can't get in because our school system, but I'm digressing. I'm sorry. I'm digressing. I'm stay on topic. So I haven't done the comparison, is to answer you. I have not done that research, but that is an interesting question to compare what the people who are getting out on pretrial, if they're working, if they're supporting the economy, et cetera. I don't know, sir.
So would it be fair to say that bail affects poorer people, people of lower income in our city?
In this city, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. In this city, it is the poor people who suffer the most. And in many times, of course, there's like so many circumstances of arrest, right? But in my experience in court, many times cases were resolved, were dismissed, were not taken to verdict after someone's just waited and waited and waited and waited and lost so much of their life. And as you know, from your professional experience, their mental health. It declines when you sit there in that environment. And it's not a reflection of the professionalism of the staff, your colleagues. It's a reflection of the reality of being in a closet.
Thank you. Representative, I'm going to let Councilman Green comment, but we thank you for your work in Harrisburg. I think it complements our work here. And if the thing I always say is, none of us are as smart as all of us. And if we pay a lot of attention to this, we'll get a good product by way of public policy. And thank you, Mr. Controller, for dedicating some of the auditing things. One of the key things that I'm going to look for in the future, if we have to be able to cost account what these things cost. Because when you debate about what is the true cost of incarceration, you had a figure of about $500 a day to society. We have about $100 a day to incarcerate. But the true cost is generations of individuals that don't realize their potential. So I don't want to get too fuzzy with the math, but we have to really control the math in order to be able to provide resources to really do what we all intend to do. Councilman Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative McClinton, for your testimony. Thank you, Controller Butkovitz, for your testimony as well. Representative, I just had a question in reference to your bill, House Bill 1092. Over the past number of years, criminal justice reform has become more of a bipartisan initiative, I think mostly because of the high cost of public safety. From my experience in working with National League of Cities, as well as National Association of Counties, public safety budget, or portion of the budgets for both counties and cities is taking a larger and larger percentage of that. And so from that perspective, I'm curious in reference to your bill, you said it's in the Judiciary Committee, and are there co-sponsors from the Republican Party, and what do you see as possible passage perspective of your legislation?
Thank you, Councilman Green. First and foremost, I acknowledged you when I started. I don't think you were at your seat, but thank you for offering this resolution that this committee is currently taking up in regards to bipartisan support. What we've seen in Harrisburg is parallel of what's happening nationally. Many right-wing conservative think tanks, because of fiscal responsibility, are now advocating for criminal justice reform. As recently as this spring in Harrisburg, when the House, first in our Judiciary Committee where I'm a member, and then on the main floor, we voted on a mandatory minimum bill in which the Commonwealth Foundation, which is very much known for its conservative viewpoint on so many topics, was one of the leading advocates asking people to not support it. What we've seen in Harrisburg also in regards to criminal justice reforms, in my 2 years of serving, we've been able to get the clean slate legislation passed so that now certain misdemeanors can be sealed, and we're on the road, it looks like, to expanding it so more misdemeanors can get sealed and hopefully even felonies. And it takes bipartisan support. Currently, though, I do not have bipartisan support on this bill as of yet. And I say as of yet because in our 2-year sessions, to have just introduced it in April, and it is now November, it is still relatively a new legislation, new concept, and it's something that I need many of the voices behind me to come to Harrisburg and advocate to my colleagues if it's something that you have obviously support.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you both for your testimony. Appreciate you. Ms. Williams, can you bring up the next group of witnesses?
Dr. Jaime Henderson, Michael Bouchard, and Eric Fader.
Thank you all for your patience, but as you can see, People have input on the process, and I want to again thank my colleague for taking her time from Harrisburg and giving us this perspective, because I think it added value to the discussion. Thank you all. Bring the mics closer to you. When you begin your testimony, please state your name first.
Good morning. I'm
Good
Michael
morning.
Bouchard. I'm the Director of Pretrial Services for the 1st Judicial District.
Good morning, Jaime Henderson, Director of Research and Development for the 1st Judicial District.
I'm Eric Fetter. I am the Director of the Office of Judicial Records for the 1st Judicial District.
All right.
Please begin.
To begin, I want to reiterate that all the stakeholders involved in criminal justice reform in Philadelphia agree that change is needed. And we have started and have been enmeshed in this reform for some time. But I also understand we have a ways to go. And we're all dedicated to staying the course of major system reform. I think with this reform comes the need to collaborate and interact with one another and the community, which I thank this committee for giving us the opportunity to do, as well as others. Unfortunately, I do not think this is happening at every point it should be to ensure the public is accurately informed. We've heard testimony, read reports and articles, and spoken to community groups that do not have a full understanding of where we are and where we are going. We would like to continue this open dialogue to ensure that in the future, all stakeholders can be involved and well informed. I'd also like to say that we welcome all city entities to come to us in regards to criminal justice reform so that we can ensure there are clear understandings on both sides of the table. We want to understand that one side and vice versa. With that being said, we can understand that when presented with certain data and conclusions drawn from that data, those conclusions seem legitimate and fair. We look forward to future collaborations and discussions surrounding these reform efforts. Also, to clarify, before the FJD can change the rules, we need an alternate system in place. This is what we're currently building. And with the assistance of the MacArthur Foundation and the Safety and Justice Challenge, that's where our efforts are focused. These efforts are extensive and have significant focus on the pretrial population. Our early bail review initiative gives a bail review hearing to those with nonviolent offenses with cash bail of $50,000 or less and no other holds. In addition to this initiative, defense counsel may motion for a bail review immediately after the bail is set, and this has been in place for many years in municipal court. Also launched is the Bail Advocates Initiative, led by the Defender Association. The pilot program has an employee from the Defender Association at police headquarters interviewing clients pre-arraignment. This allows for the defense to have a more informed argument at the bail hearing and to best represent their client's interest when magistrates are making bail determinations. Another pretrial initiative that is coming soon is new electronic monitoring equipment, which does not require the use of a landline. We plan to have the new hardware and software in place by the start of 2018. This is a new system that will allow us to grow in time with the appropriate population that would benefit from this level of supervision. Additionally, in the works is a new risk assessment. Philadelphia has been using a validated risk assessment since 1985. We've also had pretrial supervision for 3 decades. We're looking to utilize current science when developing this new risk tool in making bail recommendations so we can eliminate our current dated assessment and safely reduce or eliminate our reliance on cash bail. Finally, we also plan on creating a needs assessment for the pretrial population. We're all working towards reform and look at Washington, D.C. as a prime example, as we've heard today and in previous hearings, of what we need to do and where we need to go as far as pretrial and bail reform are concerned. I've also visited D.C. and their pretrial services department, along with Councilman Jones and Deputy Court Administrator McSorley, as well as others in the community, and seen firsthand the great things they do. With that being said, it's also important to understand they have 10 times the budget in their pretrial services department.
Say that again. You should repeat that part of the testimony.
They have 10
Please.
times the budget of Philadelphia's pretrial system,
Got it.
and they're a third our size.
I think I say that all the time.
I'm also in constant contact with national reform leaders, including those from the Pretrial Justice Institute the National Institute of Corrections, the National Association of Pretrial Service Agencies, and various local and state pretrial reform leaders across the country. Have no doubt we are all working diligently to make the needed reforms to our justice system. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Henderson to detail some data points everyone will find helpful.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
As part of our MacArthur efforts, we take data very seriously, and we have an entire initiative dedicated to the increase of data sharing practices and also to improve our data integrity across the multiple systems that we use every day in our criminal justice system in Philadelphia. The systems with which we work are not perfect, and every day we strive to better understand the data and figure out how to improve the data environment. The prison population is a very complex population, and to best ascertain who is in the prison and why, we use multiple databases. When reporting figures, we focus on matters that are responsible for an individual's detention. To clarify public data, there are instances in which the daily census data from the prison do not accurately reflect all open cases or detainers an individual may have, and thus may report low cash bail amounts when the defendant actually may have additional cases with cash bail, that it's not included in that total, or be held on a detainer rather than an open case. The MacArthur data team works daily to ensure the prison census data are broken down appropriately so that we all understand a true reflection of who is in jail to target our reforms appropriately. We approach the data carefully to ensure reforms are data-driven and to avoid misdirecting reform efforts. We feel it is important to address and reiterate a few critical data points related to the prison population. As Ms. Wertheimer stated previously, the current population as of this morning is 6,698 people, which is a 17% reduction in the prison population since July of 2015 when we began these initiatives through MacArthur. Also, only 25% of the prison population is being held solely on cash bail, and only 2% of the prison population is being held on a cash bail of $5,000 or less. I would also like to clarify that was a point that was just made previously. By eliminating cash bail, it would not reduce our jail population by 1,800 people because there are not 1,800 people currently being held solely on cash bail. Just to follow up on a note that Mr. Bouchard touched upon, our early bail review hearing initiative has been a huge success. From July of 2016, when the initiative was implemented, until July of 2017, there have been 751 hearings, and 85% of those resulted in the release of a defendant. Thanks to this initiative, we are saving on any given day, we are saving 527 beds in prison. I will now hand this off to Mr. Eric Fetter, the DCA of the Office of Judicial Records.
Thank you, Jaime. So my office, the Office of Judicial Records, is where the bail office has landed the former clerk and quarter session. So the bail office is my office. Excuse me?
You have the money.
We do have the money. The office is open 24 hours a day in the basement of the Criminal Justice Center. We are more than happy to work with any group that wants to put up bail through a fund. In fact, another group, the Philadelphia Bail Fund, actually has communicated and reached out to us. And we are actually meeting with them and are going to meet again on November 15th with them to try to finalize the procedure on how they can actually use their money to bail people out through their bail fund. So we're more than happy to work with any group at all. Just to clarify a couple of things that were said earlier today, that 30% bail refund that is held when refunds are issued on bail is actually deposited into the City Department of Revenue General Fund, index code 842729. So the money is given back to the City of Philadelphia. In fiscal year 2016, $2,922,169 was deposited into that index code. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have for us.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I believe you guys are at the nucleus of all of the reform that we could possibly do. I want to reiterate that Washington is in a totally different funding situation than you. We have asked you to come up with these reforms without, at this point, any additional resources on pretrial. But if there were those kinds of resources available, I guess my question would be, what would be the kinds of services? You don't have to be Washington, you don't have to be Jersey, but be the best version of Philly we could be. What would you recommend that we give you the tools to do? And I really appreciate facts do matter. In an alternate fact universe coming from Washington, at least here we need to be accurate in our cost accounting, accurate in what the potential is for savings, and we appreciate those facts. So I just don't want you to think that we don't. So if you had a magic wand and a magic budget, it's never going to be DC, but give me the Ford model version of what it would be, pretrial services.
I think I could sit up here and talk for hours about various services and needs. I think the list goes on. Some have been mentioned. Housing, employment, education. I mean, the list goes on. In a dream world, I'd love to house those right in pretrial. When someone comes in to check in, we can guide them to, do you have health insurance? Do you need mental health counseling? Do you need drug and alcohol counseling? I mean, the list is never ending. So I think that as we move forward, the MacArthur grant has allowed us to lay that foundation, as I said, with the risk assessment, with the needs assessment, also budgeted in our additional pretrial officers for a short amount of time, for about a year, and also a social worker who is going to be assisting with the needs assessment and working with the defendants who are placed on pretrial supervision.
Actually lit up like it was Christmas when I said, if you could have a perfect world. So that tells me your heart is in the right place. But I'm gonna help you out a little bit. So do you need more GPS technology for house arrest or less?
I think that
Gotta let them answer. We're gonna let you come up and give your opinion
I think
as well.
I think we need to be cautious of the use of electronic monitoring.
Why is that?
I think we need to make sure that we're not over supervising. And I think as we progress forward, I want to be clear, currently Philadelphia, we do not have an electronic monitoring issue. It is, on pretrial, we have approximately 260, and my numbers could be slightly off, people on electronic monitoring. We do not have GPS in our system right now.
Okay.
So as we move forward with additional funding, we need to target specific groups that would be the most beneficial to keeping the community safe, ensuring appearance, without over-supervising.
Would you recommend or not recommend, see, I'm gonna couch the question right, day reporting centers or not?
I think day reporting centers are beneficial. And I think it's important that as we look into instituting those, that we're ensuring it's in the right place for the right population, and moving forward with that type of information.
Got it. Go ahead.
Right place for the right population. Help me out with that. Exactly what he's saying.
I think that's what there's a committee that's currently discussing day reporting centers, and I think.
Oh, some of it is top secret?
No, Julie can speak to where we're at.
Okay, I didn't want to expose it, I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I'm happy to jump in. Under the leadership of the District Attorney's Office and Councilman Jones, and under the umbrella of CJAB, we are about to kick off a study, and hopefully a short but efficient study, to figure out what population or populations are best served by what we're calling actually Community Resource Center instead of day reporting. We've got to brand it separately in Philadelphia. But that's exactly what this is about. It's not just what population should be served, but what does served mean? What kind of resources are needed in a community-based fashion? And that's what I think we're trying to figure out. In a world of limited resources where we don't have the budget of DC, how can we best use what's at our disposal for the people who need it to serve them best? And to that point, I think it's at all points of the continuum. It's not just about pretrial, it's about those on probation, it's about those returning home, and it's about those who we're trying to divert from the system entirely, with a pre-booking diversion model that's set to launch within the next few months. How do we divert those folks into services rather than arresting them and charging them in the first place?
So do you have a complete list of services that you could provide us in a perfect world that you would recommend?
I could provide you with a list, yes.
All right, so I won't.
But I have a question with regard to that. What I don't want to, and I don't want to get into the nuances, but I do want to get into the nuances. We're talking about providing services in the ideal world with respect to social services, employment, maybe housing, mental health, drug and alcohol, to the end of it, to individuals at a pretrial status. And in hope that we don't have to, we can avert arrest to the end of it. Well, are we talking about follow-up as well? Some of the ideas that I'm hearing with respect to this is a matter of, I have a case is open, I'm going to this particular counselor who is benefiting me during the time that my case is open, the case is subsequently disposed of. Do I still have that counseling? Because I'm still maybe in need of that. And did we put those devices, are we talking about doing that, are we exploring putting those in place? It seems to me, and again, this is how I'm viewing it, and I may be wrong, or I may be right. It seems to me that if someone has an issue that needs to be dealt with, and that issue is being dealt with while they're on pretrial and the case is disposed of positively for them, thrown out, and they're improving in their life, do we then stop the service at that time, the service that has them improving in their life, and we say, well, let's deal with these others over here, or do we have entryways, or are we even exploring that? It just seems that we're talking about putting a Band-Aid on a bazooka hole. And so I'm curious as to, since we talked about perfect world and you opened this up, Counsel, do we have follow-up? And if we do have follow-up, is that 30% going to go to the follow-up? Because if people are in that position, people want help, a lot of times they don't have the ability to get help. If you can't pay bail, they don't have the ability to pay for services that they may have as well, or may need as well.
Can I follow up on what you said? Because I think we've been through this rodeo before. Back in the 1990s, Gene Bonney, the Philadelphia Bail Fund, we attempted to release people out of jail, but there was no plan to sustain it going forward. We did it once, and I guess I agree with Wizz's question is, how do you keep sustaining it when the recurring theme is that poverty and socioeconomics is driving the prison population and the explosion. So I agree with what he's saying, and I would like to get an answer as to how do we sustain, once we institute bail reform, how do we sustain not increasing the prison population?
So I will attempt to address both questions. The first question I can touch on is currently we don't have these services in-house. So we do direct defendants to the appropriate places in the community. And when they are no longer under our supervision, but after their case is disposed or whatever, their last visit, our officers are encouraging their continued participation in those programs. Again, we can't force that. And I do know our adult probation and parole department, for those who end up in that area, has an extensive services to offer as well. So either way, there are options now. In the future, obviously, I would like to enhance that post-pretrial supervision. But I think we also need to be cognizant that it's voluntary for people and that we can ensure that they're going to the right place. As for how do we, what was the specific question again, sir? How do we not fall back into this?
How do you sustain it?
All right, so he meant how do we pay for it? So if I could, that's up to us. And I don't mean just us on this panel, but us as a body and council. The things you care about, you fund. I mean, you can do this all day, but if we don't put dollars behind these services to give people not a guarantee of success, but a fighting chance, then we're doing them a disservice, you a disservice, and society a disservice. So at some point after we study this, we have to make a commitment to it. And to figure a way, and again, I go back to cost accounting. If we go a direction, we have to know, the days that we could open up a checkbook and just throw money at a problem are over. We have to be able to efficiently figure out how much good costs. And as a society, when we raise your soda tax, understand, that's not why we did that, but as we raise revenues, is this worth where the direction we're going? And I would say yes, but we have to be committed to that. And so we can talk about theory, we can talk about a perfect world, but we have to pay for that world as well.
Let me just point out that if you want our pretrial services, if you want the good work that pretrial services and the First Judicial District is doing and is going to continue to do to be successful, again, we have to think about length of time under supervision and length of time to disposition. It's one thing if Michael's excellent team is following up with people for 2 months and 3 hearings. It's another thing if they're following up with people for a gazillion hearings over an extended period of time. And the job of the First Judicial District is to ensure justice and public safety. It is not to heal Philadelphia from all ills associated with poverty. Gosh, I wish there was an agency that could do that and do that effectively. I think we all do. But what is exciting is the possibility of the First Judicial District, pretrial services, all of the justice partners and what they are doing to move us to a more just system. And a more just system is in part ensured by justice being done swiftly and accurately, as opposed to extending out over eons and the potential for, as we saw with Julie's data, people to be sitting up in State Road because of multiple things that have piled up over time. So you want to invest a smart amount of money that is a discrete amount of money and can't go on forever. You shorten the court process.
We totally agree. It's an opportunity to succeed, not a guarantee. Madam District Attorney.
Thank you, Councilman.
Yeah, push your button.
Thank you, Councilman, and I will follow up on what you just stated moments ago, which is what you're articulating and what the panel has been discussing is the need for data-driven solutions and using data in order to drive what we know are limited funds, no matter what the pool or pot of money or puddle it may be of money that's available, but to really earmark and direct those appropriately. To my fellow committee member that just spoke on expediency and added accurately, I agree that it is important to be expedient, but we can't compromise thoroughness for the sake of expediency or thoughtfulness for the sake of expediency. Our role in criminal justice as criminal justice partners does require us to obviously take in what you all have shared and what has been shared by many on the committee about acknowledging the societal ills and the things that people wish or hope to attain, but they're just not able to do so. That being my speaking point, I will add this as a question. The 30% that's deposited back into the city based on the fee, I believe that, Mr. Fetter, you spoke to that. Can you articulate specifically what has happened or what goes on with that particular fee or amount? How is that allocated or distributed or hopefully redeposited back into the community? I'm hopeful in that regard, but it may not be.
As I said, the money is deposited with the City Department of Revenue General Fund, $2.9 million fiscal year 2016.
Any greater specificity, what happens from there?
That would be a question for City Council,
Okay.
actually.
So again, goes right back into the bucket. We reissue it.
Yeah.
One of the things we are considering is a justice reinvestment bill that calls for some of those dollars to go into the exact kinds of services that you want to provide. It just makes sense. If you could save it and reinvest it, you get a greater rate of return on human capital.
I'd be happy to take the 2.9.
I know you would. Wait, Councilman, did you want to comment, or do you want to yield? You yield your time. Go ahead.
Thank you. You're absolutely correct. A budget is ultimately it's a moral document. It says who we are and what we value. My question to you, and help me break this down. Okay, I got a 20-year-old person that gets arrested, makes bail or doesn't make bail. Where does this day center come in? If it doesn't exist now, like, help me break it down from the grassroots level.
The committee who's overseeing the potential of day reporting centers, we haven't got to the granular yet. As Ms. Wertheimer stated, we're looking at a study to point us in the right direction and how.
Are there other cities that have one and like?
Yes.
Like, is there, just tell me, like, they leave and then they get a referral and they have to show up? Like, just give me an idea as to what that it means.
So I think it looks different in a lot of different places, and it depends on the county itself, the like socioeconomic and demographic makeup of the county where it's operating, the size, because obviously Philadelphia is going to be different than Allegheny County, or there's another county in Pennsylvania that has it.
I hate to
very
push,
different
but
than
other cities
Philadelphia.
compared to our, demographics, size, what do theirs look like?
I think.
I could jump in really quickly and add, because this is a committee that I am on as well. I've visited numerous years ago Red Hook in Brooklyn in New York, and their community court model, and Manhattan also has a community court model. And what I recall from that visit, and also from our discussions and what we are embarking on here with the Community Resource Center, is once a person is arrested, based on the nature of their offense, if it is of a certain level, they are therefore quickly directed through the community court model, which has an array of services, almost kind of like a one-stop location in terms of a structured building, where they go ahead and they appear before a magistrate or a judiciary member or a trial commissioner. I can't recall the type of the title of the person, to go ahead and assess what their need is, look at their charge, and then provide those immediate services, and then release them back into community. Sometimes they are also given community service work from there, but it is a much more quicker, expeditious process, and it's done based on giving back to the community. So what Ms. Wertheimer has stated about assessing the needs of the community and what they can support and what is necessary in that region, it is unique to Brooklyn. There is one unique to Manhattan, and I'm sure there are others, but that's the best answer I can give you regarding that.
I would even say they maintain a cost effectiveness by codifying cases. So if you have a housing authority case, a traffic court case because your license was suspended, and a regular municipal case, all of them get codified and combined, which saves on administrative dollars, which is more effective too. I went up there, it was one of the most amazing trips ever. Everybody in that courtroom, from the judges to the security to the clients, were happy because they were getting services. And I mean, am I hallucinating? I never saw anything like it, but it cost. It cost. Luzerne County is a little different. They're not as flashy, not as nice a building, but they have those tenants as well. We're trying to struggle to come up with a model for Philly.
So just to give you some perspective, so usually in a jurisdiction that provides pretrial services, there are a continuum of services based on what somebody will need to stay safely in the community and attend court. And typically, a lot of those services can just be follow-up calls. And an issue that pretrial services here identified, which is an issue everywhere, is you want to make sure that those costly services that are costly, not only costly in terms of fiscal dollars, but also costly for the individuals in the community. They have to comply, have to go to things, are only used for those who really need them. And so a day reporting center is at the high end of that continuum. It typically involves people reporting either daily or weekly to a building where they receive support and help. Everybody's right, it looks different in a lot of jurisdictions depending on how often you report, what the services that you provide are. And it's tailored to the needs of that community. But the key here is that it should only be used for those people that need that amount of support to remain safe in their community. And the vast majority of people that are let out pre-trial should never enter a day reporting center. And I think what's really important to realize is not only is that just smart for humanity, for humans. And not only is that smart for dollars, but it's actually really smart for public safety, because what the research shows again and again is that individuals who are over-programmed, over-supervised, have a greater propensity to commit future offenses than those who are treated with sensitivity and respect and not, stamped program automatic.
So we're going to,
Okay, just dump it in.
there's going to be a part where all of you will be charged with taking all of this information and coming up with recommendations. But what we want to focus on is the testimony of others at this point, because we all have our opinions about stuff. So what I'm going to do is take the prerogative of the chair and thank you. If I'm going to go with you, Councilman Green, that'll be, and then we're going to let the rest of the community give input.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to follow up on the questions that were asked earlier by District Attorney Hodge regarding the administrative fee. And so my understanding is 30% those dollars go to the general fund.
Correct.
However, who determined the 30% amount? Was that done by the FJD? How was that arrived at initially?
That, as I understand, is set by court rule.
By court rule?
Yes.
And so, okay. So that was done by court rule. And so do we know of that 30%, is there understanding of what that money is for? Other than it was just, so what I'm hearing is that from the First Judicial perspective, that was a court rule established at some point by the First Judicial District. 30% was viewed as a number that was necessary for administrative fees for for the administration. But we don't have a perspective or any historical perspective of what that 30% is used for.
Yeah, I mean, that's my understanding, Councilman. I mean, it's what it's used for. It's deposited into the city general fund, so.
So we fund them.
Oh, I know. Well, we shouldn't fund them. It's really the state that should be funding them, but that's a whole separate issue.
It's a whole
There was well, I'm not going to get into the whole backstory of that, but, and how long has the 30% fee been in effect? From your
I actually don't
understanding?
know the answer to that question, and we can check on that.
Okay. All right, because I guess that's one of the, as we were talking about a lot of different issues, but that 30% amount is something that's really concerning. This is also an opportunity. We will have conversations, as Councilman Jones has raised, and then we'll be going to the budget season in a few months, where the First Judicial District will be testifying here, as well as we'll be talking with the administration regarding the budget. But I think it seems like there's a combination of that money coming into the general fund and also the ability of the FJD to change rules. I know certain rules they cannot change, but I think there's some in their purview that they can change. And unless there's some additional information that we can get from the First Judicial District about why that 30% threshold is needed, that's an opportunity to make a change, to make have a lower burden for individuals in our city who have to provide bail, as well as make it easier for bail funds to operate when you have a smaller fee threshold.
Okay.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your testimony. We really are relying on you to be the center point once we come up with these models, come up with the funding commitment to get it right. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Williams, you want to cut?
I just wanted to jump in and highlight one thing.
You can go.
You're good. We talk about this day reporting center or community resource center study. All the points that have been made are incredibly important to take into consideration. And to that end, while we haven't rolled it out yet because of bureaucracy and the lengthy timeline it takes to conform a contract, there is written into the scope of the study a huge community input process to hear from the different communities that are affected by the system, what they identify as what the needs are. And so to that end, I think we're going to hear from community members, right, Councilman?
Constantly, and we take those recommendations seriously. We have experts, and then we have people who are experienced in it, and so we do relish that input. Ms. Williams, who's the next group of witnesses?
Devrin Washington, JoAnna Powell, Carlette Golden, and Reuben Jones.
Thank you so much for your patience. Please come up to the witness testimony table. Thank you for your patience. So you bring the mic to you, state your name for the record so that we can get it, and then begin your testimony, please.
Devrin Washington. I'm with
Welcome.
Black Lives Matter and founding member of the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund.
Can you pull it a little closer?
A little closer?
Yeah.
Is this better?
That's better.
Okay. So I guess on behalf of the community, the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund, I just want to say thank you to Councilman Green and to the special committee for holding these hearings. And we hope to have a productive dialogue regarding our work. So 175 years ago, an enslaved woman by the name of Harriet Jacobs hid in an attic of her grandmother's cabin. She stayed in this place, unable to straighten her back, watching her children basically grow before her eyes between slats in a floorboard because she was running away from slavery. She was running away from abuse, and she basically wanted to be free. So one night, she called for her children, and she said goodbye to them. She spent the night with them, and then she got on a boat, and she stowed away to Philadelphia. Because at that time, Philadelphia was a land of freedom for black people. It housed the largest population of free black people during the time. So, in effect, people or enslaved people who lived in places like Edenton, North Carolina, they would buy their freedom from their masters if they could, and they would run to places like Philadelphia, or even Philadelphia specifically. And now, because of pretrial detention and the money bail system, these descendants of these people are buying their freedom from Philadelphia. And that was only but 150 years after abolition, right? So it's safe to say that 175 years after Harriet Jacobs came to Philadelphia, that Philadelphia is no longer in step with its legacy of freedom. With the largest jail population out of all the largest cities of the United States, our community in Philadelphia understands the physical toll, the emotional toll, and the economic toll of pretrial detention and the cash bail system. So when Mary Hooks, the co-director of SONG, created the idea of a national Black Mothers Bailout Day, our community answered the call by raising $60,000 within a week. This is the community that the median income is $22,000, which is $8,000 below the national median income. This is the community that is a community that is housed within the poorest large city in America. 1,300 people donated $50 apiece in order for us to buy back our Black mothers from the city. So, in part, that was to show the city and its our elected officials a reflection of what the city has become, and how inaction in abolishing that system has affected the communities that you have sworn to protect and represent in a negative way. So, additionally, although many people are missing from our communities, the community itself is still dedicated to upholding the long legacy of resistance. And the success of Mama's Day bailout is a demonstration of that lived tradition of resistance and the struggle to free those still held in cages. So by using deferrals from the Defenders Association, the No 215 Jail Coalition, Black Lives Matter Philly, Sankofa Community Empowerment, Frontline Dads, Media Mobilizing Project, Decarcerate PA, and the Youth Art Self-Empowerment Project, or YASP, bailed out 13 women the day before Mother's Day earlier this year. The goal was to give freedom back to the Black women who cared for and birthed our community. We did this in recognition of the important role of Black cis and trans women in our communities. They are our educators, our advocates, our nurturers, and our protectors, and we identified affordable but effective pretrial support services that we could offer and have done our best to administer them consistently and without judgment. In fact, we pride ourselves on being a non-judgmental bail fund, which means we do not judge a person for the charges against them. We believe and strive to remind the city that as citizens, we are innocent until proven guilty. The work we did around the freedom of Black mothers was also inspired by the activism of Black women, who for years have worked to highlight the effects of cash bail on a vulnerable Black community, and for decades have led the fight against mass incarceration. So in closing, the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund is aware of the City Council's work to enact criminal justice reform, but as a community-run organization, our work is to remind you of the human casualties of this unjust system. If in America we are innocent until proven guilty, why do you shackle those who have not gone through due process? An accusation by the state without conviction should not lead to the loss of your children, job, and liberty. To speak further about the human toll that the money bail system has on the community of Philadelphia, we have Carlette, who will also testify.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Can we hold up a second? Where is it? Is he here? Is he there? Okay. All right. We'd like to take a second to acknowledge another returning citizen, but in a different way. First Class Sergeant Dante Copeland has spent 14 years in the service and is coming home for the first time. He is being escorted by Councilman O. He's outside. And if you could join us in welcoming him back home. So are we surprising him?
Yeah,
okay.
We are. And Welcome Home Heroes is also
Welcome
here.
Home Heroes?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Veterans Day and Veterans Week.
Gotta get a mic. Here you go, from that side.
Veterans Day and Veterans Week starts this Sunday with our parade.
Is he here?
Forgive me. But
Come on
we
in.
honor those.
Welcome to City Hall.
He has no idea what's going on.
Come
Let's
on.
welcome him.
Come on in, man.
please.
Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Let me just explain that he cannot be in any pictures, and we are actually being televised right now. So we're going to do this with his father, and he will be there over to the side, rules of the military. It's a surprise to him. It's a surprise to many of us. But what happens is we have this opportunity. So let me move forward with this, and we'll move along here. Thank you very much, Chairman, for lending us this time, and everyone for allowing us to do this surprise honor. And I am here with his father. So I will ask Wanda Pete to step forward and to make the introduction, and we'll go from there.
This young man, he can't be in camera's eye. This young man has been 14 years helping to preserve the freedoms of this country. He is currently stationed in Texas. He has received a Purple Heart. He has received 4 combat stars. You'll do that? Okay, good. But I just want to say, if there are other veterans here today, please stand. We recognize you, we appreciate you, and we look forward. And we have Welcome Home Hero here today to honor this young man. And then I'm going to turn it over to Councilman O right now. And also, we want to commemorate you with the medal that we give out from the Veterans Advisory Commission done by Councilman Curtis Jones.
Sergeant First Class Dante Copeland, a 14-year active Army Aviation Attack Helicopter, NCO, is currently stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. Sergeant First Class Copeland successfully completed 2 combat tours in Iraq and a tour in Korea, among other Army missions. He received a Purple Heart for injuries suffered in combat during his initial tour in Iraq. Sergeant First Class Copeland has been awarded the Purple Heart, Meritorious Service Medal, Iraq Campaign Medal with 4 combat stars, Army Commendation Medal with 3 Oak Leaf Clusters, Army Achievement Medal, 4 Oak Leaf Clusters, Global War and Terrorism Medal, Korea Campaign Medal, National Defense Service Medal, Army Service Medal, Overseas Ribbon, and the Good Conduct Medal. In 2012, Sergeant First Class Copeland received one of the highest honors in the Army, induction into the Sergeant Audie Murphy Club for exhibiting the highest levels of leadership and performance, the best of the best. Sergeant First Class Copeland is the son of retired Army Master Sergeant Harold Copeland, a member of A Hero's Welcome, and he, the proud father, is standing behind me. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Good afternoon to everyone. Councilman Yo, Wanda Pate, Brenda Heckland from Heroes Welcome, thank you for coming. I'd like to say thank you for everyone for taking this time to honor my son. He's never been welcome home back to Philadelphia in his 14 years, and I wanted to take this opportunity to officially welcome him back to Philadelphia. He hasn't lived here in 15 years, and the family, we hold him in high honor for serving our country honorably, not only in Iraq, but in Korea and also throughout the United States and other assignments. I want to thank all the veterans who are here. Councilman Yo, I know you're a veteran. And I just want to say, I'm a retired 30-year vet, and military service is part of my family tradition. And my son, I can't tell you how much it means. This moment is very important, not only to me, but our entire family, to honor him and have the city of Philadelphia honor my son, Sergeant First Class Dante Copeland. So if we could just give him one more round of applause.
We'll have one more thing to do. At this time, I will ask Councilman Curtis Jones Jr. and Councilman Derek Green to step up and stand with me as we present a Liberty Bell to the father for Sergeant First Class Dante Copeland. This is on behalf of Mayor James Kenney. Dear Sergeant First Class Copeland, as the mayor of the city of Philadelphia, please accept my gratitude for your many years of exceptional service in the U.S. Army, including time spent in Iraq and Korea. As an active duty aviation attack helicopter sergeant, your continued service to our country is honorable. A highly decorated veteran, you have received many commendations throughout your military career, all of them well-deserved. These special recognitions include numerous medals and honors, and induction into the Audie Murphy Club. Clearly, you demonstrated the leadership abilities necessary to be an outstanding member of our armed forces.
I'm happy to recognize you for your dedication to our country. I wish you all the best in the years that lie ahead. On behalf of the City of Philadelphia, thank you for your incredible service. Sincerely, Jim Kenny, Mayor. All right. Take this down for a second. Yes. Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. I apologize. I did forget, we do have Brenda Heck from Heroes Welcome.
It's my honor to represent a Heroes Welcome. We welcome home our troops and we honor our veterans. And Master Sergeant Harold Copeland is an honored member of our organization who requested us to be here today, as we would. I'm going to present this to Sergeant First Class by way of his father. This is our award from a Hero's Welcome. This award recognizes the service and sacrifice of Sergeant First Class Dante Copeland. On behalf of a grateful nation, we thank you for your service and sacrifice and dedication to the preservation of our freedom. We are pleased to recognize you as an American hero. We have two other short presentations as well. Another item that we present to our returning heroes has a Native American foundation to it. These are beads for our heroes. Every color on this strand is symbolic. These are warrior beads, and they were presented to returning warriors from battle. The gold beads are for the Gold Star families, those who have lost. The blue beads are for the Blue Star families, those who have one or more currently serving. The black beads are for the POWs and MIAs. The red beads for the blood that has been shed, white beads for the purity of the cause, and blue beads for the heavens above. You are a true American warrior. And lastly, we have a star from an embroidered star from a retired American flag. And it states, I am a part of an American flag. I have flown over a home in the United States of America, but I can no longer fly. The sun and wind have caused me to become tattered and torn. Please carry me as a reminder that you are not forgotten. Thank you for your service.
All right, thank you very much. I know you're doing very important things right now, so thank you, Chairman. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience. And state your name again, and please begin your testimony.
Hello, my name is Carlette Golden. I'm here to speak for the women at Riverside Correctional Facility. I was arrested on July 8th, 2016. I spent 14 months in jail for pretrial because I could not afford a $100,000 bail. I'm only here because the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund was able to bail me out so that I could come home last month. Being locked up on cash bail makes it hard to find anything out about your case or to work on your defense. While I was detained pre-trial, I was brought down to CJC 10 times but only made it into the courtroom once for a preliminary hearing on October 6, 2016. 3 months after I was detained, that was the only time that I was in court. I was in a courtroom. My case kept being continued, but nobody told me anything. I never knew anything about my case or even my charges. I never met or even talked to my court-appointed attorney in the entire 14 months I was incarcerated waiting for court. The phone number listed for my attorney online was disconnected, so my family could not get in touch with him either. My sister works 2 jobs and was not able to take time off to try to track down my attorney. So I spent over a year behind bars not knowing anything about my case or if there was any way I could get out. I never thought I would be home. I never thought I would see my mother again because she was not well. My mom is a senior citizen at 85 years old. My situation added more stress to her. It was stressful on my whole family because I was never accused of any charges like this before, ever. And they had no idea if I was ever coming home. Without the money for bail, all I could do was sit and wonder, how would I get through this? When the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund came to visit me, that was the first time I felt any hope of getting out and being able to fight for my life. I think the most important part of the bail fund is to give people hope, to know that we are not just a number in the system, but that we do have a voice. We are silent when we are locked up, but have a voice when we're not. The only time we have a voice is when we're free. If my bail was not paid, I would still be just another number. I would still be sitting on State Road, but now I'm here today speaking for the women on State Road. Because of the bail fund, they helped me connect with my lawyer. And because they posted my bail, I was able to finally meet him for the first time this week and find out what was going on with my case. If I was still incarcerated, I would not know anything because I was not bailed out. I was able to come home and live my life again and reconnect with my family. As soon as I came home on bail, my mom got sick and I had to go to the hospital. I was able to come home and be with her. Somebody else in my situation with money would have never been incarcerated. Someone who could afford to pay $10,000 in bail would have not lost the past 14 months of their life. I was caged for over a year just because I did not have the money to pay for my freedom. I am not alone. My story is just one of many stories. Most people who are in jail with me are also there just because they cannot afford to pay bail. That is why I'm speaking today, to speak for the voices that can't speak here. We ask the city of Philadelphia and everyone in this room to end the system of cash bail so that nobody has to go through what I went through. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to hold questions until all of you testify. Thank you.
Hi, I'm JoAnna.
Hi.
I'm from West Philadelphia, the Main Shore section to be exact. I'm 28 years old. I'm currently a lunch lady. Prior to my offenses, I was a home health aide for hospice patients. How I got involved in the Mama's Day bailout was that I was arrested on May 8th and incarcerated at Riverside Correctional Facility. So I'm also speaking for the many ladies that are at RCF. That place is horrible. I wouldn't send my worst enemy there on their worst day. And if it was the last place on earth, it wouldn't be my worst enemy last stop, basically. I spent 5 days there, which felt like 5 years, because I still say 5 years. If I hadn't been bailed out, I wouldn't have gotten out until August 29th. Mind you, I was arrested May 8th. The case that I was fighting was 2 misdemeanors and 2 felonies. I got arrested because there was a street fight with children around the corner from my house. Adults were trying to stop the fight, and elder adults assumed the younger adults were fighting children. And people also look at me like a child because I look young. In my case, I was trying to break it up, and the charges was ultimately dropped. The people who pressed charges on me was going to get court in her lies because she said something about like I broke her arm or something, which was a lie. So she decided not to come to court to testify. The case was dropped in August. I plan to get the whole thing expunged like my previous charges from 2009. I remember when I seen the judge, he set my bail at $25,000, which meant I had to come up with $2,510 to get out. Once I got in front of the judge, he just set the bail. It traumatized my family. Then they had to come up with a magic number that this person just shouted at you, and you have to call your family with whatever change that you have in your pocket. Hopefully you got change, because I ended up having to ask the girl in cell 5. I I ended up calling my dad, which is my support system. I didn't know where he was going to come up with $2,510 because I'm just a lunch lady, and that's not the kind of money I was saving. And if I was saving, it wasn't for that. You know your family is stressed out because you're there. Your kids is probably with your family, which I only have a son. The most I was thinking about was how I was going to get out. Where was my family going to get this money from? And the most epiphany I had was, I was just in Disney World 2 weeks ago prior to me being arrested. So I was in awe, like, how am I in a jail cell when I just was in Orlando? And I'm like, we don't have that kind of money saved up. We're just trying to make ends meet A to B. Being in jail was really hard because it kept me away from my son. He's 10 now. He'll be 9. He was 9 at the time that it all occurred. Even though it was a short time, it definitely affected him. He really wanted to know where I was at, and sometimes I would try to call, and we would miss each other. I knew he wanted to see me. He would talk to me. I knew he wanted to talk to me, and I didn't know what to tell him. And when I did get on the phone with him, I would just cry. It felt like my heart was taken out of me. On May 13th, the day we was bailed out, the day prior to that, I got a visit. And I didn't know where the visit came from. I didn't know if it was my lawyer. I didn't know if it was my mom because she wanted to come and get my keys to get in my house because my dog was out. It was just a lot. And I got a visit, and they were like, we're trying to bail you out for Mother's Day. And I was excited. I didn't know where it came from, why. So the day we got bailed out, I couldn't sleep that night. It was a rainy day. We boarded the van to go get transported, and where they dropped us off, it was like the middle of nowhere. And all this rain, and all these people just popped out of nowhere like, we're here for you. I was so excited, and I jumped and hugged this one girl. She had flowers and like this purple gift bag for me. And I want to apologize if she in the room, because I did knock her down. I was just too excited to get out. It's the worst place ever. Accidentally knocked her down. I still wanted to thank her and apologize to her for knocking her down. That was Saturday. On Sunday, Mother's Day, I totally spent that whole day with my son in the house. It was awesome. I just kept pinching myself for like a week. I kept pinching myself. Do you still pinch yourself? Yeah. Like, we here? You here? Right. I don't think this system of cash bail is fair. What if, in my case, the other young woman, or the other young woman's case, the charges was completely false? If I hadn't been bailed out, I wouldn't have sat in jail for 4 months before the case was dropped. I feel like there should be some kind of investigator at the beginning. I think it's unfair to everyone, to anyone that gets put in that position. I think it's unjust, honestly. The criminal justice system itself in Philadelphia is totally corrupted. Even if I get a case and I might beat it or it gets thrown out, thrown out, it's still on my record. I still have to fight to get them off of my record. So get them, the charges dropped off of my record. I've seen it happen before at 8th and Race. I've seen 2 people fight the same charges in different races. I've seen one person go home and I've seen one person stay. I feel like it all has to do with how the judge's feeling that day, honestly. If he's feeling good, you might go home. If he ain't, you gonna stay. And that's just what it is. I could see Philly being a safer environment without cash bail. I think it could rebuild our communities, because I do want to ask, where do that 30% go? You say it goes back to, where is it?
General fund.
General funding? What general funding? Where? Exactly. I can see people actually donating more to different causes in their community. I don't think of it if people had the option. People would start donating to their communities. People might make their playgrounds safer, might pay their property taxes. Who knows? I think people would build their communities back up. That's all I really got to say.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Please stay. We may have questions, please.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So, thank you for this opportunity to really put this issue out there. I have this written testimony that I may share, You have it, a copy of it. But as I was, by the way, my name is Reuben Jones. As I was sitting here this morning, a couple revelations started to come to me about this bail issue. So I hope you allowed me the opportunity to kind of lay out what I was feeling, what I was going through. So the first thing was, I've been in a lot of these city council hearings about different issues, the special commission. What I noticed is the community always goes last. So the community is the least valued people in these processes. We don't have lives, we don't have other things to do. Half the commissioners gone, none of the city council's here, but the community is still sitting here because this is our lives, right? So we're not just here to talk about data, we're not just here to talk about numbers, we're not just here to talk about statistics, we're not just here to talk about human beings, right? So that's the first thing I want to present. The second thing is I was really amazed at the officer who came in and the reception that was given to him and the love that was shown. And we talk about the freedoms that are being protected by people like him who put on the uniform. And everyone applauded, and we love that. But the very freedoms that he's protecting are the freedoms that we're infringing upon. The very things that we applauded this gentleman for putting his life on the line for, you're sending people away from their families for. Not you, don't personalize, I'm talking about the process, right? When we offered the presumption of innocence in a country, in a system that's predicated upon freedoms, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, but we say, poor people, no, you buy your freedom. And let me say this, crime and criminal activity is not just relegated to poor people. It's not just a poverty issue. So we talk about this issue like racism doesn't exist, right? Like white supremacy doesn't exist, like injustice doesn't exist. We lay all of these societal ills on people who are poor. And we got to stop that because it ends up being costly to be poor. So we have to buy our freedoms. So what I want to say, and I think I will just skip the testimony, you can read it on your own. But you might have seen me on my phone, I was jotting down notes. So I want to read something. The notes that I jotted down was this. It's time to abandon the low-hanging fruit approach and adopt a bold and audacious approach to social justice reform and lead with conviction and compassion by doing not what is comfortable, but what's just. No matter what progress has been made, it's not enough. We need to do more, and we can do better than reaching for the low-hanging fruit. What we're really talking about, what we really talk about is the fair treatment of human beings. We can argue about numbers and data, we can disagree with political agendas, but the one thing I want to challenge the city's leadership to do in this commission and city council and everyone listening is to take a humanistic look at our current crisis of human trafficking through the cash bail system. Human beings are being held in Philadelphia jail simply because they don't have the money to pay to get out. Does anybody see anything wrong with that? Even if the population on State Road, as just Lerner so eloquently stated earlier, was only one person, that would be one person too many being held in prison simply because they couldn't buy their way out. And we're not just talking about cash bail, we're talking about reforming this whole process and having a complete culture shift in the way we think, the way we operate, and the way that we conduct business in terms of criminal justice. So we're talking about detainers, we're talking about pretrial detention, we're talking about it all. We're not just talking about opening the gates and let people walk free. We're saying no matter what the charge, low-level offenses, nonviolent, drug offense, violent crime, we're saying offer everyone the same guarantee that the Constitution provides, which is the presumption of innocence and the right to due process. And that shouldn't be interfered with because you can't afford to pay a cash bail. Punishment, we talk about day reporting centers, we talk about GPS systems, but punishment is not a service. Everyone that's walking through the door facing a charge isn't dealing with mental health issues or drug addiction, and they shouldn't be forced to go to a center to just to say we justify closing the jail. No, we should close the jail because it's inhumane to lock people away in a cage. And we shouldn't punish people. And we shouldn't punish people and send them, force them. Yeah, there's some people that need drug treatment. There's some people who need anger management. There's some people that need all kinds of treatment. But we shouldn't force people to go to a program simply because we let them out of jail by ending the cash bail process. So I challenge us to just stay focused on providing those constitutional guarantees of the presumption of innocence and allowing folks to work their way through the system and by allowing due process. Now, I do want to just mention a couple things about the bail fund, if you can indulge me for an additional minute or so.
Take your time. You were patient enough, so we're going to be patient with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And let me just share a story that nobody in this room really knows. But I was arrested back in May of 1987. And my bail was $150,000. And I posted bail of $15,000. And I was never released from jail. And I spent the next year fighting my case from jail because my bail, unbeknownst to me, was revoked before I ever got released. So that's my personal experience with the bail system in Philadelphia. So I want to humanize all of these experiences so that we know that we have a duty, we have a calling. Everyone on this commission is a public servant. And that public service means we have to be bold and courageous. We don't follow the whims of public polls. We stand on that limb. That man stands on the line and protects it and defends it with his life against people who don't care about his commitment to that line or to those ideals. And I'm challenging everyone in this room today to stand on the line with us as human beings. Forget the labels. Forget the backstories and the histories and the challenges that the city faces and start thinking about human beings. So the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund, I'm off my soapbox now, let me get back on point. The Philadelphia Community Bail Fund was formed out of success of the Mama's Bailout that we talked about. So the Community Bail Fund posts bail for residents of Philadelphia who can't afford to pay bail and works to bring to light the inequities of the use of the cash bail in Philadelphia, and to advocate for the abolition of bail and pretrial detention. I really want you to hear that. We're just not talking about bail, right? We're talking about pretrial detention. No one of those 6,700 people should be sitting in prison before they're convicted of a crime. They should have equal access to an attorney and witnesses and research and family support and everything else. We know all about the collateral damage, losing homes and families and children, because if you're not at work, you're going to lose your job. If you don't have a job, you're going to lose your home. You don't have a home, you may lose your children. So we understand that. But what you want to focus on is that presumption of innocence. So even in our minds, when we think about the most horrendous crime, the way DC does it, if there's a person who poses a public risk, then they won't be released. And I think sometimes there's an interpretation that we're saying something different. So ending cash bail doesn't mean any less accountability for those accused of a crime. It just means that we are going to stand on that line that the officer committed to and defend those rights and privileges the Constitution guarantees. And that's the fundamental question that we're asking in regards to ending cash bail. I don't think I want to read any more of the testimony. I just really want to leave you with that one simple question. Do you believe that it's unfair to hold people in jail and punish them before they've ever been convicted of a crime? And if you don't, then we don't need to argue about the numbers. We don't need to argue about the statistics, the data, or any of that. Let's be bold and let's be courageous and find a way to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else on your panel to testify? No? So we can go into interaction. First of all, thank you for your patience, and I do agree that you spend a lot of time listening to other people, and never is the community last. Maybe it's more like we say the best for last. And in my experience, I work for you. I work for you, and I take that real serious. So I value the life experiences because they are real. But let me share this with you, Ruben. I didn't fall off a churn-up truck from Never Neverland. I grew up in a neighborhood called West Philly. My nickname back then, and I see it's being taken, was Turtle, from 54th and Burke Street. And so a lot of my friends wound up in situations. I'm going to talk about one, and why instead of following my education and going into economic development, cutting ribbons and doing the business opening, which I did, right. I wound up in public safety and wound up chair of this committee, is because one of my lifelong friends, his name is Gregory Elder. Maybe I shouldn't say his name, but I will. Served his country just like that young man did. Came home from the war and was addicted. Instead of getting the treatment that he needed, he wound up turning to some criminal activity. They arrested him. Instead of taking him and put him in rehab, they put him in State Road. Ironically, one of the other members of our social club called The Gang was actually a prison guard up there and was talking about his condition. He had because of the use of the drug, had lost function of his kidney. He needed really a transplant, but at least dialysis. And for whatever reason, they didn't give him that treatment. They treated him with pills instead of the dialysis. A couple of days before I got sworn in, I got word he died. I was on my way to another committee to do the ribbon cutting. I chose this committee because of that. So I want you to know that whether you're on this side of that table or that side of the table, 1 out of 3 African American men goes through that process. And it has to be fair. It has to be humane. Your story, sister, touched me, because that 1 week can change your whole life. Absolutely. And we realize that. And yeah, we got to crunch the numbers because I got sworn in to do that. But never forget that the human side of this is the most important side to us. And so I'm standing here too. You waited, I'm waiting, because your testimony is valuable. That young man right there set us off in this direction with your testimony maybe 18 months ago. And we've been grinding. We've been going to Luzerne County, Pittsburgh. We've been to Red Hook because of what you've told us. So we're not just sitting up here and that lady isn't typing just to, kill trees. We're going to change policy. And the answer to your question is yes, no one deserves to be in jail who was not committed or convicted of a crime. So I'm going to answer it for the record. All right? So we together on this. And it's hard. You got to play your part, I got to play my part. But we're going to get to the right place. And that's what I'm telling you. Are there any other questions for this man?
Yeah, I have a question. First of all, I agree that a lot of policymakers, they usually tell you what they're going to do for you without asking you what the community actually needs. But I would also caution, I have a suspect sitting in jail right now who murdered my son. And personally, and I'm speaking personally as a father who lost a son to murder, I don't want him released. There's got to be circumstances where you don't just release everybody. The evidence points to the fact that he killed my son. And if we're going to just release everybody from jail, murderers, rapists included, no, we have to do our research. That's why this committee has been very, very, very stuck on getting those risk factors. Risk factors, you're not going to release someone who just raped kids in the street. We disagree on that. I'm not releasing the guy who killed my son.
So, do you mind if I respond to
Sure,
that?
go ahead.
Respectfully, you know, I think that that's a tragic circumstance that happened with your son, and we all have compassion for you and your family in terms of what happened. But in the case of bail, even in the cash bail system, someone charged with first-degree murder wouldn't be given bail anyway. So that doesn't factor into this conversation necessarily, but I do, you know, have a tremendous amount of respect for what you do and what you bring to the table. So we're talking specifically about the folks who are currently eligible for bail, having a different system in place instead of cash to mitigate those releases. So, I felt that there was a lot of people in the room who lean more towards that line of thinking, and that's why I said what I said earlier, that that's not what we're talking about. But we don't want to make a distinction between charges either, low-level, nonviolent drug, whatever. But there are some folks who, and even in D.C., who are determined to provide whatever risk to the community, and they are not released even through that process. So they have to go through the, you know, be detained until the process is complete. But that's not necessarily weird. And I think that you want to add something.
Just like you. My brother was killed April 2nd, 2006.
Excuse me. You got to state your name again.
Oh, my name is JoAnna. My brother was killed April 2nd, 2006 in broad daylight on 40th and Lancaster Avenue. They still haven't found his killer, and it's been 11 years. So with cash bail, like I asked where that 30% goes, is it a possible way maybe it can go to investigators to solve some of these murders?
We've been meeting with the homicide unit, and they don't have the necessary resources or the technology.
Right,
We've
that's
been
what I'm
meeting with
saying.
Captain Ryan. I totally agree with you. That's another conversation that we have to have. Families of murder victims.
Right,
Where
no.
is the support for them?
That's what I said, the 30%. You saying it's going back into reform? General funding? So is it a possibility maybe it can go into the homicide division so they can solve some of these murders in Philadelphia?
So here's the thing. That's why when we do the budget, we need you here. We need, because.
I would love to be
No,
here.
I mean, we're going to invite all of the coalition, because that's how you make priorities. You make $1 out of 50 cents, you have to decide how you're going to fund things. And we agree with you that there should be when we save money, it should be appropriated to things like that.
Right.
So
There's no
we're-
way a black male get killed in broad daylight and no one knows anything.
So what we want to do is, this is just one subject, but we need your input on all of the priorities that we have. And we appreciate you taking the time to do it. We really do. All right? With that, please.
So I just want to, so thank you. You know, Ruben, as I was, and thank Councilman for including the Pennsylvania Prison Society in this committee. As I was preparing, as I was preparing to be here today, and I was thinking about what my perspective was, and, you know, of course, a bail fund is so important, and, you know, the first panel talked about it. The bail fund is a Band-Aid for what we've got right now, and we need that Band-Aid because we've got what we've got right now, right? And I think I was coming to this with the perspective, this is the pleasure of living in Philadelphia, right? So for those of you who know me, I've lived a number of places. I spent 4 years out in Western Pennsylvania, and I just take it for granted that I live in Philly and people share some of my perspective on how the world works. And so I think I was coming with this perspective of everybody sort of coming from the idea that cash bail, at least as it is used now, is a tax on poor people and incarceration of poor people. You know, we can debate the extent, we can debate the impact, we can debate the cost savings, but we're all coming from that place. And so I thought, you know, what can we, the Pennsylvania Prison Society, add to the discussion? And you just said it so much better. You just said it so much better. And I think what I was attempting to do, which is what you all did, is that this is a part of a discussion about getting a justice system that's just. Totally. And thank you for saying that.
Thank you. So again, we come from different lenses, but I think we're attempting to get to the same place. And the assumption that everybody thinks clearly like that is not the assumption. In the world we come from, we battle other perspectives on how crime, punishment, and justice should be delivered. And so, and we're lucky that we're here in Philadelphia. I traveled to Harrisburg, totally different perspective on crime and punishment. I never forget, and I don't want to, I'm getting off my soapbox because I want to get to the other people. There are places when we would be celebrating here in Philadelphia, closing a prison. Well, the folk from Frackville protested the governor because they did not want the prison to close because what it represented to them was income, an industry. And so everybody doesn't share the same, and we take what we learn from you and do battle on your behalf. I have one question. How did you pick the individuals that you were going to bail out? I'm curious. How did you pick them?
So for the Mother's Day, for the Mother's Bailout Day, we worked with the Defenders Association. But going forward, the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund, we take referrals. A lot of them actually happen just through word of mouth in the jail.
So did you review the cases and say?
Yes. So we do have a process around.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to hear.
Call up another member because
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Karen went into the jails and did the interviews with the people.
I mean, I think that's so because you had to do a risk assessment, I guess.
Well, I wouldn't call it necessarily a risk assessment. Kara, do you want to take this?
So it wasn't a lottery.
Okay. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a risk assessment. What we do is we have Kara or LT. They go in and they interview an inmate or person that would like to be bailed out. Then they name their support system. So then what we do as a group is we actually interview their support system to determine any needs that they would have when they come out of jail. And then we make the decision based on the person's support and the interview from the person, whether or not we think it would be a good idea to bail them out.
So you did a risk assessment. So,
because the thing is, the difference is that because it's not a risk assessment necessarily, because it's a needs assessment specifically. So we're just looking for information regarding things that would cause them harm when they get out, so that we would be able to connect them with the appropriate resources. We're not saying any of the questions that we ask would not be a barrier to them getting out if they answered it like, yes, I do have a substance abuse problem or I have an anger management problem. That wouldn't necessarily mean that we're not going to bail them out, because at the end of the day, we do not believe that they should be there to start with.
I swear to you, I'm not doing a trick question, but a true question. So you basically made a determination whether they would be a danger to themselves or society as well, right?
So I think it's important to clarify that we do not have any kind of risk assessment. We're intentionally non-judgmental because our role is bridging the gap between the way someone is treated. Oh, sorry, my name is Kara Tratner. I'm another organizer of the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund and the Mama's Bailout. So, I mean, we're bridging the gap between the way someone's treated who has money and who doesn't, right? So if that person had that money to get out, they would already be out and home with their family. So we don't see it as our role to figure out whether that person should get out or not, whether that person is a danger or not. But the reason that we're taking the time to connect with people's supports on the outside, with their family members, with them on the inside, is to make sure, does this person want to be bailed out? Do they consent to this? Because we're doing it for them, right? And we want to get that. And also just, do they have whatever they need to be safe when they're getting out? You know, we know there's risk of overdose when you're first getting out of jail. So if they themselves identify that there are supports they would like to have in place, then we want to be able to support them in connecting to that and make sure that they have what they need. So I think that's also a model that our justice system can consider of assessing someone's needs and supports as opposed to their dangerousness.
Are you going to do it again?
Yes.
We are. We're planning a large bailout for the holidays as well, a similar model of the Mama's Bailout Action, which is kind of a larger scale fundraising drive, but we're also currently doing it. We never stopped. So after the Mother's Day bailout, we've continued to bail out Black women. Carlette is one of the women who, after 14 months, we were able to bail out after that initial action. But we're receiving calls on our phone as we speak from loved ones who have people in their family or community detained pretrial right now, asking us to help bail them out.
How do you raise the money?
Have we, you said?
How do you raise the money?
Well, we raised $60,000 in a matter of about 5 days on the Mama's Bailout, which I think is a testament to national Black-led organizing and the movement for Black lives being behind this. I think it's also a testament to the power of community fundraising. So we're not worried about being able to raise the money because we know that there's a huge amount of support within our own communities and networks to be able to support this work.
Right.
Councilman Green, sounds like something we could get involved with? Okay. No, I appreciate what you did. And so I was curious as to how you selected and other things, but thank you for what you did.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilman Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank all of the witnesses that testified for really putting a face on this issue. When you think about the fact that people who, just because they are poor, are being basically pre-incarcerated, which is, it's a travesty when you think about, look at the American flag and the things that we do in this country, and the fact that just because someone's poor, they are being incarcerated. Although they may have been probable cause for a crime possibly have been committed, they have not been convicted. And just because of their economic situation, they are being incarcerated prior to any type of conviction. And I think that's the reason why I put together this resolution for this hearing, because it's something that we need to address here in the city of Philadelphia. And I want to thank you for the work you've done and the work you've continued to do, as well as the work of the special committee to really try to address criminal justice reform in our city. But I did have some questions in reference to the bailout fund. And we've had some previous conversations before. I'm curious about what steps can the city take, other organizations take to help you in your work to try to help more people not have to go through the situation they're currently going through right now, until we get to a point when we don't have cash bail. As I said, no, this is somewhat a bridge into that time period when we don't have that. So I'm curious of what are some of the things that we can do as a city. I have some ideas, but I want to hear from you. What are some of the ideas that you're hearing and from your work, the things that we can do?
So first, I think I got a little emotional. I was actually supposed to address that, so I apologize. But, you know, we have a few main asks that we would like to see the supporters in. And the first is, A, we need this fund to be able to revolve. So the way the city can help us directly is exempting that 30% tax, if you will, from anyone that we bail out through the bail fund.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. Number two, we are asking, and however it goes through the courts, or, you know, whatever the process is, to allow us, the community, fill out a community bail fund for the people whose bail we post, to allow us to become the surety without penalty, so that the money can be returned back to the bail fund. What happens is we operate on a good faith system, so people like JoAnna, we trust her to return the money, but we would like to have it revolve back to the fund so we can continue to bail people out. And then number three, having the courts support this in a way that we are a recognized entity, that we can go into the prisons uninhibited to conduct the interviews to be able to assess the person's need prior to release and set all those support systems up. So those are the three main ways that city government and city leadership can support our work. I don't know if Karen want to add anything to that, but those are the three main points that we kind of want to present, you know, to the council, to the commission, to the mayor's office, to ask, can you work with us around those three major points so that we can continue to bail folks out without limitation, without those encumbrances of bureaucratic process.
Okay.
Sure. I think Karen wanted to add something.
State your name again.
Kara Tratner from the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to echo also, I mean, those are specific things that would make our work easier. Like, we're doing the work now and plan to continue, but certainly those would help us be able to do this in a more sustainable way until we see the change that we're actually looking for. So I know a lot of people already have talked about a bail fund as this very Band-Aid kind of harm reduction, very temporary bridge to the longer term change that we're looking for. So I think in addition to that, we want to just ask as well to be able to work together, to have community oversight continually over these processes as you're making these policy changes. I know that we've been meeting with the implementers at the MacArthur table and look forward to continuing to work with those individuals. We've been meeting with city council members, but it feels important to us that when we're talking about ending the system of cash bail, I know there's been some debate also about the numbers of how many people are held on bail alone, but we're talking about a more transformative change, as Ruben said, of actually changing the way that we're holding people pre-trial, which means not just replacing it with another risk assessment tool that's going to detain the same group of people, if not more, right? Not just replacing it with electronic monitoring. So I guess that's another ask of a way that you can support our work, is to listen to the stories of people who are being directly impacted and base your policies on the reality of their lives.
And for us, equity means at the decision-making table, not just at the conversation table, right? So it means inclusion on direction for whatever policy changes are made, inclusion at the table with power and access to those institutions, not just the formality of dialogue, which is wonderful in itself, but we do believe that these are the real experts, not to diminish anyone else's expertise, but the folks who live this experience, the folks who have been arrested, have loved ones arrested, have communities demolished, they have the most powerful voices to lend to this experience, to inform and to lead and to direct whatever the change may end up being. And we also have the ability to challenge from the outside, and I know that sometimes that's a difficulty, but the challenge from the outside to avoid the low-hanging fruit and not be satisfied with the low-hanging fruit, but to really raise the bar and be the trendsetter. Philadelphia is looked at around the country. If I can digress a little bit, we just had a primary election in April where, we would meet with folks around the country who looked at Philadelphia as this shining star of transformation because you were able to elect, even at the primary level, a district attorney who's a restorative justice practitioner, right? So people really see Philadelphia as this leading edge change agent. We have to live up to that. And we can't continue to just rest on our laurels and say, okay, we did this, so we don't have to do that. No, we're saying, cool, we appreciate doing that, but now we're gonna, strive to do even more and even better, and not allow folks to languish in the jail simply because they don't have, the resources.
So we agree you're the experts, and the reason why we formed this committee is to get that expertise. And as we move forward with the incremental gains, we're going to do what we can to get to a tipping point, if you will, where...
We're there. The incremental gains we're beyond that. This is literally life and death.
Got it.
Right? And we can't look at increments anymore. We either going to save a life or somebody's going to die.
So
that's the very proposition. When Sergeant Copeland is on that line and someone is approaching to encroach on the American ideals of freedom and liberty, he doesn't have the luxury, you get what I'm saying, of incremental change to deter that person.
So here's where there has to be a process by which we gradually get to a point to justify what we're doing. Otherwise, we get sued. Well, how did you come to this determination? And so we're methodical in seeking this testimony from different points of view so that it is considered, and then at the end of the day, we stand on that product as being thorough. And so we want to get to the same place. And so the studies support the policy change. And otherwise, we'd have just did it because we understand, we get it, we understand. But if we don't do it in a way that we can, through those testimonies and all of that, stand on it, it can be taken under. I ran the Minority Business Enterprise Council in another life. We did minority and female participation in contracting. And it was started way before I got to that point. But when they started it, they didn't do it in a methodology, and it was struck down by court. That's not going to happen here. We're going to stand on process that we got to a place the right way. And so I want to do it quicker, but we're doing it right.
And I believe you. My fear is just that sometime in the community, incremental change sounds like later, and later never comes. It feels to folks in the community that incremental change is kind of that carrot on the stick to appease folks, and then we never get to the big bite. So I don't want to sound like I'm knocking incremental change. I just want to, and I hope that I'm speaking for the group, I just want to make sure that we don't get satisfied with that incremental change and never challenge ourselves. What we're looking for is wholesale policy change, because administrations change, and we want something to be long-lasting beyond who's mayor, who's DA, or who's whatever. Like, this is the way that we operate in this city, as opposed to, here's a moment that we could, create an increment, and then it's up to the next person to do something else.
You're the customer, you're always right, but
I think,
maybe it's just me, I don't know.
I think that there has to be an acknowledgement of the real lives that are being affected while you're going through this process. Right. And that's why it's so important that you support us in the way Ruben said prior, because we're coming up against hurdles that, are having real human, there's a real human toll that those hurdles represent. I did want to just I've heard a lot of testimony regarding cash bail and everything, and I wanted to kind of challenge you to broaden your scope of how to reform the system of criminal justice, and understanding the piece of the puzzle that is policing in this country. So we all know that the federal government basically came through and did a report on policing a few years back. There's a dissent decree, and the ACLU is working with the courts to monitor the police department as it's changing. But the problem is, and if you read the last report, there is a piece that's missing in the progress that the Philadelphia Police Department is making, and that piece is actually accountability, right? And so in different places, I've heard it said different times, the FOP represents a hurdle that it seems that the city is unable to surpass. But the FOP, the progress that the FOP is stopping is what is also playing into mass incarceration in Philadelphia. So when you have large numbers of police, because we have one of the largest police systems, police departments per capita out of most of the cities in the country. So when you have these large amounts of police departments or police officers that are going into mainly black and brown communities and over-policing them, and not policing the white communities in the same way, you are playing into the disparities that you see today. Right? So you're playing into the fact that 90% of the people who are held pretrial are black and brown, right? And then you turn around, and those people, in order for them to either get out of court, get a truncated sentence, they go and then they plead, right? So now you have all of these people who are in jail, who you don't really know if they are actually guilty or not. You know that they pled out for whatever reason, because we already know the majority of cases, they don't go to trial, a plea deal is met. So I just want to, impress upon the City Council that there's work to be done in all levels of the criminal justice system. And when you talk about cash bail, you cannot leave out the sustained statistical data of the police department and their unconstitutional practices upon the community in Philadelphia.
So, again, I try to remind you that when I leave here, I got to ride back to my house in West Philly.
Right.
And so they don't know who I am a lot. And to give you the sense that we're in this together as a community. My daughter was on the front page of the Daily News, you may remember, having her door kicked in because she was in the wrong zip code. So it happens, we know it happens, and we're trying to fix it. And I know it's not fast enough sometimes, but there's a process by which we do. And you raised a very important point about unions and how it affects what we do. We got to figure our way around that stuff because everybody ain't of the same mindset, as you pointed out. We got to figure it out together. All right, Julie?
Quickly, I promise, because I know
We have
Pastor
one last
Nick
person
is
to testify
waiting.
after you.
First of all, I want to thank you all for testifying and wanted to answer Ruben's question directly and in context kind of answer part of your statement, Devin. I think we agree on a lot more than we disagree, and I think a lot of what's been said by you, by the councilman, by other folks is right in that we all generally believe the same thing. We're just probably not doing it on the timeline that's fast enough, and don't necessarily agree all the time about how that change is going to happen. But that's why the dialogue, not just in this chamber, but the dialogue we've started to do is important. That's why it's important to hear, to your point, the stories from JoAnna and from Carlette and from other folks that we've heard from in the past, like Josh, because you're right, it's not all about data. At the same time, kind of to the point Devin just made, this system, this government is this huge behemoth battleship tanker. And so if we're going to turn it around, that's why we talk about data, because we need to figure out how to turn it around with limited resources. And so it's about not just cash bail, but about the system as a whole and how do we address all of it as quickly as possible, understanding there's urgency without, accidentally turning it into an iceberg. I mean, some might say we've already hit icebergs, but how do we avoid another one of a different magnitude? And so because you waited so long, I wanted to answer your question from my perspective, from our perspective, and also say that, I know we'll have the opportunity to discuss this much more in the future and look forward to that.
And thank you for your urgency of it, because you're right. It's a different feeling when you're sitting in that cell. And I can sit here and it's comfortable and it's air conditioned. It's a different perspective, and I get it. All right? Thank you all for your testimony. And, I'm sorry.
I have to share this. In the three, I'm not going to preach here, but in the three of the major faiths, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, there's this prophetic tradition, right? And that's what I think all of us are doing, in a sense. We may be sitting here, you may be sitting there, but we're all fighting for this world of social justice that we desire, right? In front of the church that I pastor in West Kensington on Sunday night, I arrive and there's a dead body in front of the church. It's covered, it's raining. This was Sunday night at 10. Monday morning, I hear yelling and screaming, and it's the families that are coming to the site where their son got killed, and there was still blood, there was still brains, there was still a bullet casing, there was rubber gloves. Somebody dropped the ball, right? So when we're talking about police and what they're doing and this process and who, the questions are, I could sit back and say, well, that's just the way it goes, but that's not the way it goes, because then the questions come up. Who's responsible? Is it forensics? Is it the fire department? Is it the local cops that showed up? Somebody dropped the ball, and what we're doing here is we're asking these questions so that there is accountability on the criminal justice front, on mass incarceration, on this reform of the bail system that we're trying to do. So you all are an inspiration to all of us here, to me, and let's keeping on together. You're holding us accountable. We are working all within the system, trying to make a better place, trying to make a better Philadelphia.
Well, I think that's a good point to go to our last witness together. Ms. Williams?
Pastor Nick O'Rourke.
Thank you, Pastor, for your patience. Hope you prayed for us all. Please pull the mic to you. Good afternoon at this point, and state your name and begin your testimony, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Councilman Jones, the mic is moving on me. Let me see
You
if
can
I can
take the mic out if
just take it out.
it's better.
Councilman Jones, members of the committee, grace and peace to you. Shalom, assalamu alaikum, good afternoon. Thank you for having me at this hearing today. I am Reverend Nicholas O'Rourke. I am a community organizer with an organization that some of you may be familiar with called Power. Philadelphians Organized to Witness, Empower, and Rebuild. We represent about 50 congregations within the city of Philadelphia, 15 to 20 in the metro counties, as well as expanding out into the center of the Commonwealth. We are an economic and racial justice organization committed to seeing that exacted in the various campaigns that we work on. I also serve as a community organizer for the West Philadelphia and Center City cluster of our congregations. As the brother here mentioned, we do work with all of the Western Abrahamic faith traditions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. We even have secular humanist congregations within our entity. And so, obviously, I am a Christian minister, and as a Christian minister, there are particular expectations, particular views about what it means to be a Christian and what a Christian minister should be. We're often looked at and expected to be advocates of charity, and we should. I think that's a great thing. But what is often overlooked and what is looked past is that we're not just here to serve charity and service, but that overlaps with the call to expand God's justice, peace, and in the earth. That is our duty. To that end, the ground floor of my faith tradition and others is found in the creation narrative. And whether or not you agree with the literacy of that or the literalness of that, I think the tenets that are found in this creation narrative are important for this discussion that we've been having all morning. The book of Genesis makes about 4 interpenetrating affirmations, so to speak, that provide the ground basis for what we're talking about today. 1, that all are made with equal dignity in the eyes of God, everybody without exception. 2, that earth and everything in it equally belongs to all. 3, that the earth itself has rights and needs that have to be taken care of, and it's not just a stage for human performance. And 4, that every human being is equally co-responsible with God to help to protect the dignity of everyone and everything. That's really important. This provides the basis for all the subsequent moral teaching on social order that we follow. The Jewish prophets affirm this when you follow the chronological narrative of the scriptures. Affirm this over and over and over again, 800 years before Jesus even comes on the scene. This idea that we ultimately are to focus on and realize that the quality of our faith depends on the character of justice in the land. The quality of all of our faiths depends on the character of justice in the land. And that character of justice, echoed by the prophets, echoed by Jesus, is measured by 3 groups: widows, orphans, and foreigners. Literally and emblematically represents what we call the least of these, which would be the poor. In a city like Philadelphia, which you have heard many times over, we live in the city that has 26% poverty, deep poverty. Most of the people in the city, we got a lot of people of color, people that look like me, look like you, Councilman Jones, that are stuck in that. And so it's imperative that if we are going to be true to this call, as a person of faith, we've already heard so many of these stories. I'm speaking from a moral position. As a person of faith, we have to consider how moral is it for us to recognize, knowingly operate in the city that has that kind of deep poverty, that many people of color that are being sucked into it, and actually by systematically criminalize that poverty. When folks are literally sitting in jails at an average of 23 to 24 days before they're even heard by somebody. In some cases, I heard from Keir Bradford Gray when we had a meeting with her, 8 months people are sitting in there because they cannot pay, 40% of which cannot pay a $100 bail. You've echoed it already. How do we sit with that and allow that to continue on? It is a breach against what is all that is holy within us. That reverence that hums in every single person. We know it's immoral. We know it's wrong. Jesus comes on the scene later on. He actually starts his ministry proclaiming several things that he must do. He said, I'm anointed to proclaim the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, set at liberty those who are oppressed, proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Then he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down, echoing the words of these Jewish prophets, setting in order the moral narrative for the Christian going forward. And often, in many ways, some would argue would have articulated some of that moral teaching that we can find even in our Islamic traditions. If this is so common throughout our faith traditions, as the brother has mentioned here, how do we, at least in the faith community, sit idly by and allow that to happen? And so we are not. We stand in solidarity with the No 215 Jail Coalition. We stand with Decarcerate PA, with Frontline Dads, with all the folks that have been testifying here today to say that we must end cash bail, end money bail in this city. That this bail fund is a wonderful stopgap. The idea that folks were able to actually bail people out of jail. You heard the stories, how moving they were. Wonderful. That is great. And also, let us not get our eye off the prize. Let us always remember that we should be moving to a place where we are not making it in such a way that it's better for you to be rich and guilty than it is for you to be poor and innocent. Let us always remember what our brother Ruben said, the humanity of the people that we're looking at. No one is saying that we should just let everybody all out, that their justice should not be in the land, but justice does not criminalize people because they are poor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I just have to say, we saved the best for last. And that spiritual note is why we all should be here, to do what's right for society. And I want you to know, as a council person, I didn't just wind up here. I've been the victim of, 16 years old, walking down the street, someone murdered the person I was with. And I've been on the other side of it, being Turtle from Burke Street. So I think I have a fairly grounded perspective on the balance of this. This 18-month journey that this committee has undertaken, with all of our members' input, is the foundation, with your testimony, of public policy change. And I think it didn't wait, Julie, for us to be done our work. It's beginning to take root now. And I think at the end of the day, I found the best public policy is the one everybody's a little bit mad about and a little bit glad about. And where that compromise comes in, that keeps the balance of that justice, keep us safe, but keep us fair. And if we can do that, by taking these real-life testimonies and incorporating them into our policy. And I'm going to take you up on not just the testimony, but as we start to design what it is, legislatively, budgetarily, to seek your guidance on that as well, to take that real-life input and put it to work. I like what you did, bailing those moms out. Want to be able to incorporate that into something so that you never have to do that again. That's the end game. Are there any other comments from the members of this committee? If not, this committee will stand in recess and no, wait a minute. Last word should be a word of the originator of this. Do you have any closing words? Councilman Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank everyone for their effort today. There's more work to be done, and we should not take our eyes off the ball.
Thank you, Councilman This committee will stand at recess.